Welcome everybody back into Nerd Sesh. As always, I'm Carson Bradburn. Alongside me is Logan Camden, and today we are continuing our task of ranking the top 50 players in NBA history with numbers 30 to 21. That's what we're going to be covering today. Now, this is the third episode of this series, so if you missed the first two episodes, you can go ahead and check those out for all of our criteria, honorable mentions, and of course the explanations of rankings number 50 through 31. For now, though, Logan, before we get into this section of the list, why don't you just recap the first 20 names on your list?
Affirmative, Mr. Breber.
Number
you, sir. 50, Jason Kidd. Number 49, Russell Westbrook. Number 48, Big Game James Worthy. 47, Manu Ginobili. 46, I got Chris Webber. 45, Reggie Miller. 44, Ray Allen. 43, Damian Lillard. 42, Gary Payton. 41, Jimmy Butler. 40, Jimmy James Harden. 39, Clyde Drexler. 38, Bill Walton. 37, The Anomaly, Jason Tatum. 36, Isaiah Thomas, Zeke. 35, Karl Malone. 34, Elgin Baylor. 33, Hondo, John Havlicek. 32, Scottie Pippen. And 31, the Admiral, David Robinson.
In my 50 spot, I had Isaiah Thomas. At 49, Jimmy Butler. 48, Joel Embiid. 47, Luka Doncic. 46, Bill Walton. 45, Paul Pierce. 44, Ray Allen. 43, Clyde Drexler. 42, Clyde Frazier. 41, George Gervin. Number 40, Bob Pettit. 39, Reggie Miller. 38, Jason Kidd. 37, John Stockton. 36, Patrick Ewing. 35, Elgin Baylor. 34, Anthony Davis. 33, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. 32, James Harden. And 31, Kawhi Leonard. Already, we have disagreed and we have differed a ton on this list. Like, we are just going to have dramatically different lists. That much is clear, and I think that theme is going to continue into today's episode.
Well, unfortunately, I hate to do this for my journalistic credibility. I do want to, I guess, make a redaction. There's just been this one guy that I've been looking at in my 30 spot. Don't get me wrong. I've already said I want to redo this entire list and tear it up already, but there is one that's been specifically bothering me about this episode, and I think you were just right on last episode. The one that I'll come to your side on, I have Anthony Davis in my 30 spot. He's going to be the first guy that we talk about for me today. I'm going to be honest. I just don't feel great about having him above David Robinson. That's one audible that I think I would just concretely call right now. So it's not that big of a change, and I'm not going to do this graphically. I'm going to stay consistent with what I did during the episode. I'm just going to keep Robinson where I had him at 31 to make it consistent. But I would move AD to my 31 spot, and I would move David Robinson to my 30 spot. I don't feel great about that one.
And Chris Webber at number 46, are we sticking with that?
Well, I'm just going to I'll wait until we redo this list in a few years, and I'll correct that one. Yeah, I would.
You could redo the list after doing the list. You could say, okay, that was my top 50 last month. This is my top 50 this month. We're always learning, man. We're always making mistakes.
I do want to call it on. That's one that I will be I'll leave Chris Webber in my 46 spot for gesture reasons, but I will admit I've been looking at that like all morning before this show, and that one has been bothering me. So I would call an audible there. I would bump Robinson to my 30 spot and AD to my 31, but they aren't separated by that big of a difference. So I will talk about AD today. I just did want to get that out there off the top.
Yeah. David Robinson, I think we're probably going to talk about a lot today because I think we do differ on him a good bit. Before we do get into the top 30, I will just very quickly recap sort of my guiding principle for this list, which is if I have these players for their entire careers, and for active players, that means obviously only their career up to this point, who gives me the best chance to win the most championships? That is the general philosophy through which I am viewing this list. And so with that being said, Logan, unless there's anything you want to add, why is it that Anthony Davis is here at your 30 spot, or I guess your 31 spot?
He's got
range.
He's got an incredible two-way peak, man. I mean, the thing, I just do want to say this on the AD D-Rob thing before we get into further so I can put a bow on it. When I rank this, I think I kind of got overwhelmed by AD's gaudy numbers. Like, I literally just think the numbers kind of blew me away, and I also just ignored the kind of context that he was playing alongside a LeBron for while he was putting some of these up, where David Robinson didn't have that benefit, and then he does get Tim Duncan. But I just think that I kind of overlooked that context when I was looking at AD's numbers, and the fact that if I'm going to talk about and be critical of David Robinson having some injuries later in his career, I don't really think it's logically consistent for me to not be as critical when I think Anthony Davis's have been more damning throughout his career. So that's just the slight reason. But I mean, AD's numbers are gaudy, and I still do think his skill set is ridiculous, and what he provides is that of a top 30-ish kind of caliber player, top 30, 35, wherever we land on him or wherever you want to rank him. He is an incredible basketball talent, and above everything else, the reason that he is in these conversations and in this range is because of his two-way peak. I mean, there are just very few players in NBA history that have had this kind of talent on both sides of the floor and the kind of defensive versatility that a guy like Anthony Davis does have, and that above everything else, as the offensive game may be inconsistent and not always, his apex offensively to me is that 2020 run that we always talk about where he was an elite jump shooter and an awesome lob threat. But throughout, maybe his offensive game, going up and going down a little bit, still really high level. Just, was he at his apex? It was always great defensively, an elite rim protector, and just a destructive kind of defensive player and what he can do, and specifically to different kinds of schemes and offensive players and how his skill set translated across different matchups. I know you brought this up last episode, and I think it's a great one to bring up. The Steph Curry series later on in his Lakers tenure, where he is just super disruptive in the pick and roll and blitzing them and blowing up any action that they want. I mean, during his prime, man, AD in the playoffs and in the regular season has given you damn near 3.5 stocks per game. And just, again, this kind of rare, rock-solid versatility that is just incredible for a guy his size. He is an elite rim protector, but he is also a guy that can get out there in space and defend and just switch in general across different superstars and different archetypes. And then while he is an incredible defensive player offensively, he is an elite complementary kind of piece. And just to circle back to this David Robinson thing for one more point, I was critical of David Robinson being a number one, and I didn't think it was logically consistent for me to be critical of David Robinson as a number one and for me to not be critical of AD, where it's like AD had the benefit, right, where he was still a very high-level player, but he didn't have to take on that kind of responsibility alongside LeBron, where he could play that complementary role. And while I think it suited both of those guys better, I don't think it's logically consistent for me to just be like, oh, look at Anthony Davis's gaudy numbers, and that's what puts him above David Robinson. He's given you 26 efficiently on over 60% true shooting, when I just don't think the numbers are the be-all, end-all when AD did have the benefit of playing alongside a guy like LeBron, and when he does get his ring, right? And Robinson gets his ring with Tim Duncan, too. That context is important, but I just think I was a little bit more critical of David Robinson. I think I gave AD, I was a little bit more lenient with him when it came to some of the offensive concerns as a number one. I think AD is like a dream number two, and we got to see that realized alongside LeBron, but I just thought I was a little bit more critical of David Robinson when I kind of let the numbers overwhelm me a bit with AD. That being said, like I said, I still think he's got an incredible two-way peak. The reason that AD can't be any higher is some of the availability concerns and the longevity stuff, like the injuries have lingered. This is where AD is, period, and I would be surprised if he climbed any higher for me. I really don't expect anything else out of him the rest of his career. This is, if he gives you literally anything in Washington, it is quite literally just icing on the cake. I am basically evaluating AD as a finished product. That being said, the only alteration I would make is he would slide in at my 31 spot, and I would move David Robinson into my 30 spot here.
Yeah, the Robinson point is very clear to me because, if we visualize sort of the perfect situation for either one of these guys, I think it is what you're talking about, where they are these elite defensive anchors, and offensively they are your second best player. Maybe they're your leading scorer, but they are not entrusted with this huge offensive volume because of playmaking limitations. But if they have that lead playmaker alongside them who can set them up, who can take on a bigger offensive load, then you're talking about really good offensive number two, defensive number one, absolutely fantastic player who you can win a championship with as your best player. The difference is David Robinson was way, way better as a number one than Anthony Davis, because I actually think the Pelicans years for AD and the Spurs years before Robinson gets Tim Duncan are comparable in terms of the supporting cast, right? Just the limited talent they had alongside them. But where Anthony Davis could never lead to good offenses as your number one offensive option, David Robinson led to consistent top 8 offenses as the number one guy. And defensively, where AD, his superpower is probably more so his versatility, his playoff defense. He was never like a historically great regular season defensive anchor. He wasn't one of those guys who was just churning out top 5 defenses, whereas David Robinson is on the short list of the very best defenders to ever do that. So with mediocre talent alongside him, David Robinson was still getting you to like 55 win seasons consistently. It's why I say he is one of the greatest ever when it comes to carrying a team on both sides of the ball throughout a regular season, whereas AD's New Orleans teams, they weren't talented, but they were just mediocre. Like, he could not bring them to the same level in terms of regular season excellence on either side of the ball that David Robinson could. And so as playoff players, I think there's definitely a conversation to be had. But when I think about the overall value of an 82-game regular season plus the playoff run, like, it's very clearly Robinson to me. I do think you were overly critical of Robinson, didn't give him enough credit, didn't consider the context enough, and we will come back to that, but not for a while in this episode for me. In my 30 spot, I have John Havlicek, who we already talked about a bit last episode because he fell just outside your top 30 as AD did. For me, in his career, he gave you 21, 6, and 5 on even efficiency in terms of true shooting, but provided extremely well-rounded impact for a really long time. The longevity, especially when you're talking about the 60s and 70s, is just elite. To have a 16-year career in which you are consistently a really productive, effective player throughout. Now, he definitely grew a lot throughout that career. He improved dramatically as a jump shooter over the years. He became a more efficient scorer. He took a huge playmaking leap and ultimately went from like complimentary player, sixth man, to then the second best player, leading scorer alongside Bill Russell, to then ultimately peak after Russell was off the team when you're talking about 1970 to 1972, when he's giving you like 28, 8, and 7 with slight plus efficiency, was more efficient by that time, even with more volume, and also a really good defender. So that's when I think it all came together for Havlicek, but he was a very complete player at his best. He was an awesome off-ball scorer, very active without the ball, good combination of size, skill, and strength. And so he was a very effective scorer, if not the most efficient, really good passer for the position. And then defensively, he really stands out. Great instincts, very physical, long, disciplined, great hands, really well conditioned, like somebody who could really commit himself to that side of the ball and give you high-level value over the course of a game, while he's also taking on a big offensive load. So overall, I think that all-around impact is the selling point with Havlicek, and the longevity and the playoff performance that from 1966 to 74 in the playoffs, he gave you 26, 8, and 6 on plus 2% relative true shooting. Like, that is a very impressive playoff resume that he has. I do think the challenge with Hondo is separating the team success that he contributed to and his individual impact, because he was the best player on a championship team in 1974, but he was also paired with Bill Russell, who was the most impactful player on one side of the ball that we've ever seen, who won a handful of championships before Hondo even joined the team, and then he was dropped into that infrastructure, and he was definitely super important, but also definitely a beneficiary of the situation. And when we did see him asked to carry a team without Bill Russell or Dave Cowens, and it was very brief, it was really only one season, they were only a 34-win team. That was 1970. So he was definitely flanked by really good talent throughout his career, and is not one of these guys who we're going to look at as like a great floor raiser, somebody who was really carrying teams whatsoever. But he showed you the ability to be an elite number 2. He showed you the ability to be a number 1 on a championship team and ultimately positively impact the game in all these different ways for a really long time. And so that is where I land on him. In my 30 spot, the few players behind him I do think peaked higher, but the difference is ultimately just the longevity that I get out of Hondo, where when I think about my criteria, right, who gives me the best chance to win the most championships with them on my team, that total value added is where he has the edge.
Yeah, I think you broke it down really well, what made the Havlicek dilemma so hard to rank him, just the different periods throughout his career and how to strike that balance. But Hondo's longevity, I also think, does some heavy lifting. As I talked about Hondo in last episode, I know you have already discussed this guy previously. And I do want to correct something else I said about guys like this. I don't think I can. I said that I was thinking about maybe dropping guys. I actually am pretty happy with all the active and current guys and how high they are on my list, and I also don't think that's logically consistent. This is where I've got Luka Doncic, and again, like, I don't know. At this stage in Luka's career, I'm fine with having him here. It's just I wonder how much higher and if he can climb higher with some of my big concerns about Luka moving forward. For the reason that he's already here, Luka, quite simply, is just one of the best offensive players I have ever seen. The guy is a genius playmaker. He is a dynamo, wizard-like passer. Like, there isn't a pass that Luka can't make in the book. He is also an all-time difficult shot maker. Like, he just makes the game look so easy. When we were talking about just the most skilled and when they got it going, the most beautiful offensive players ever, Luka's on that short list to me. He is so unbelievably talented and skilled. And I just think if you were working from a place of this is my guy offensively, he does so much for me offensively that I just think the team build around him is so ridiculously easy that I will just take what he's given me out of the gates already offensively, and I think that I can put the defense and the role players needed around him to make up for some of his shortcomings. I think he has already provided that at this stage in his career. But I think the more interesting question to me, and I know that we'll disagree on how high he ranks already at this stage in his career, but the question to me about Luka, and we've discussed this a lot on the show because of how often, the injuries with the Lakers, the big AD-Luka trade, we talked about these concerns. I think the most interesting question about Luka is just how high he can climb, with how much time he's got left on the court, because I think I do have some very major concerns about Luka. The first is the shot selection. We've talked about this a lot, but he is so reliant on the step back and pull-up three. He has become increasingly more reliant on the pull-up jumper in general. He doesn't get downhill nearly as often as he once did, and I've said these numbers on the pod before. The highest average shot distance of his career came this season at 17.8 feet. Just 7.6% of his shots are coming from inside 3 feet. That is the lowest mark of his career. That's 10% lower than 3 years ago in 2023 with Dallas. That's 18% lower than 2020 with Dallas. That was his career high. For context, too, just 27.4% of his shots are coming with inside 10 feet. That is also the lowest mark of his career. That has been nearly halved from his career high, where that was also 2020 with Dallas. And I don't think that is a problem that is unique to Luka, that these guards, as they get older, they get downhill less and less. I don't think that's a thing that is just unique to Luka Doncic individually, but I do think it's something that is core to him maximizing his efficiency and maximizing his impact offensively, him striking that balance of taking those shots that are really effective for him, those perimeter they're unstoppable when he's hitting them. And it's not an issue of him taking them, because I think it's actually a superpower and a weapon for Luka that he can get to the step-back three so easily and rain those on teams and just burn your face off with them. But again, it's about striking that balance and not becoming so limited and so rigid, and that being the only shot that you get to over and over again, right? It was something that I was critical of James Harden when he gets to the playoffs and he becomes too rigid and he's so reliant on the pull-up jumper in the step-back three. It's like, I do want to see Luka get back to that, and I just don't know if that's on the table, man. Like, we have 6 seasons now of him steadily declining in that department, and again, it has increasingly declined over the last 3 seasons too, and so that's a concern of mine. Again, not of Luka being a baseline effective and a really good offensive player and offensive engine. Again, it's at him maximizing and getting the most out of his all-time ability and skill set. And then beyond that, it is the rigidity of the play style and the off-ball impact. He is a very heliocentric and ball-dominant player. In the regular season, 4 turnovers per game. In the playoffs, 4.2 turnovers per game. You and I, Carson, have talked for a long time about him potentially ever tapping into some sort of off-ball impact. I kind of think that's more of a pipe dream at this stage in Luka's career. Like, I just think that he hasn't done it to this stage in his career. We've never seen it work. I don't think there's a willingness to do it. I don't think that's ever going to be a core part of his play style. I just kind of think this is who he is. And then beyond that, it's the two-way impact and the limitations. You know, I think Luka, among the guys, is one of the more limited two-way players in the top 30, and maybe just flat out one of the worst defensive players in the top 30. And that is going to hinder him from climbing higher on my list. So I know that we're just flat out going to disagree on where he ranks right now at this stage in his career. Personally, I think he is so skilled and has shown us such an offensive height that I think he belongs here. But as it stands for him climbing on this list, I don't know, man. I don't ever know if he's going to clean up or get better in any of these. And it's just like a reality of it's not normal for a guy that has these kind of concerns this late in his career for him to just magically turn it around or to get more athletic, or Luka's magically going to get in shape and become a impactful defender. Like, I kind of just wonder if this is who Luka is and if any of these things are going to correct course as he gets older and older. I don't want to completely wipe it off the table, but I do become increasingly more and more skeptical that it's ever going to turn around for him.
I think it's a really interestingly negative spiel for you being insanely high on Luka all time at this point. Like,
well,
I feel like I'm less concerned about where he's headed than you are, but also up to this point, I do not think he comes close to having the total impact, total value added of a top 30 player in NBA history.
I just mean I think his talent warrants him being here and what he has. I'm just saying that those are the areas where if Luka's going to maximize his efficiency and impact, those are the areas where Luka would fix. And I don't know. I would be kind of surprised if any of those concerns were wiped away with what he's put on tape, or, you know, for all of them. Like, that's how he climbs higher on this list.
What I will say, though, is even though the ability to get by people and the rim pressure has significantly diminished with Luka, what he has supplemented that with is just flat out an improvement in shot making. Like, I think we have seen that over the last 3 years. Yes, the step back three is more volatile, and I think it does make him more susceptible to some inconsistency, but I also think the level that he has reached as a shot maker and the volume at which he does take that shot also leads to even higher peaks offensively than what he had earlier in his career. So ultimately, I don't think it's that Luka's baseline effectiveness has changed. I think it's more so that the style has changed, that he has become less capable of getting by people, finishing at the basket. He's become less of that paint scoring presence, but he has supplemented that with better three-point shooting. His free throw rate remains astronomical. He still has this unbelievable floater range, mid-range touch, and is still a great passer, as you're saying. So I don't think it's that Luka is trending downwards. I think more so what we've seen with him and where I've been critical of him is that other people have gotten better. Other people have passed him by as he has lost something in his game that he's replaced with something else. But I just don't think the impact with Luka is as substantial as when healthy, the top four players in the NBA today. That's where I land on being a little bit lower on Luka, more than it's like, oh, I think he's headed down a terrible path. Like, he's still awesome.
Yeah, I want to be clear about that too. It's more so that even with his lack of burst in athleticism and that kind of quickness that really enabled him when he was younger to get all the way downhill and stuff, I feel like with a slight adjustment that Luka could still weaponize his strength more and just get to those looks more often in a different way. And I want Luka to have more variety and more different kind of shots that he can get to, because I feel like that kind of shot diet variety will be more helpful in making him a more impactful playoff performer, which I think is most important. Whereas I thank you for, I don't want this to come off as like overly negative, because I still think he is really uber talented, and I do think he's one of the best players on the planet now. I just hold him to such a high standard because I know how talented he is, and I just want to emphasize like the margins of where I think he could maximize himself and really just become the best version of himself in the playoffs. And, like, I still think he could strike that balance a little bit better. Like, the guy is really big. He's really strong. And, like, I just feel like if he was insistent on getting to those looks and still working methodically at getting downhill and not settling as often, that, I don't know, that he could maximize his abilities in the playoffs.
I think a lot of it is just a physical transformation, though. I mean, Luka is a lot bigger, he is a lot stronger, and he's also older. And I would agree, doesn't take the best care of himself, isn't in the best physical condition. But I think there's trade-offs with all this, and like hyper-focusing on it, to me, is almost missing the forest for the trees when it actually does come to the issues that I have with Luka's play style, which have basically always been the same, which is that, yes, he is this incredible offensive talent. He's a brilliant scorer. He's a brilliant playmaker, but he does play a style that hasn't been the most conducive to, like, top-tier impact because there is a rigidity with him in terms of the hyperball dominance, the high turnovers, the fact that he does score with good efficiency, but not the sort of efficiency that we see from like some of the elite guards like a Shai or whatever. And then the fact that he is a negative defender. Like, the question with him has been, does he play a style that is going to lead to a championship or is going to lead to the same level of massive impact on his team that we do see from some of the other top tier players? And over the course of his career, the answer to that has pretty much been not quite. Like, he's only got a +4 on-off differential in his career. That's going to trail all of the great peers of this generation by a good bit. He has only in his career led one top 5 offense, and it was a brilliant number 1 offense in 2020 when we saw the Mavs just spread out and put a bunch of shooting around him and like a vertical spacer, and he had this massive offensive load on his plate, and he carried that group to a really good place. Also, the NBA at that point was a different league than it is today, though. And over the course of his career, again, Luka has not delivered a formula that I think is as great when it comes to the ease of building a championship team around him as it is with Jokic, who I just think is on a different level as an offensive engine in terms of the ease of building around him. Shai with the two-way formula. Wemby with the GOAT-level defense we saw this year and still the substantial offensive impact. Giannis at his best with that two-way dominance. Like, it's just Luka, to me, out of those 5, if we look at the best they've given us in their career, he's 5th. But really, I think the biggest difference in terms of the all-time ranking is just how much more I'm valuing longevity, because it does matter a lot to me. Like, Luka does have, at this point, 7 seasons in which he was a top 5 guy, never a top 2 player in the world, but like just to be in that top 5 range for that long does matter. And even though he took the little dip in 2025, he came right back in 2026 and had a great season and finished that season extremely strong. But when I just look at some of the guys you have him above, I'm like, how could he possibly be 11 spots above James Harden when I think their peaks are so comparable? And while I would agree that Luka is a slightly better playoff performer, I think there are a lot of the same pros and a lot of the same pitfalls to building around both of these guys who are rigid, great offensive talents, but rigid, ball dominant. There's an efficiency ceiling with them that isn't that high in a playoff setting. Like, Luka has gotten his volume in the playoffs, but he has done it on slightly below league average efficiency. And then the issues of the negative defense that you're getting from both of them, where James Harden has brought me 15 years of star level value with a peak that I think is comparable to Luka. I just don't see how the total impact, the total value added with Luka is in any way greater. Like, to me, that's crazy to have Luka above Harden at this point. By the end of their careers, yeah, I hope Luka's above him. If you're going peak for peak, I would take Luka. But in an all-time ranking, like, it's not close to me. The gap in terms of peak is just not nearly as big as the gap in longevity.
I'm just not as moved. Like, I do give Harden credit for I just don't. When it comes to like the high end, like the longevity of the regular season and him doing that for so it doesn't matter as much to me. When like I just do trust Luka more as a playoff performer and it like translating more, even if it's like half of what Harden has given me at this point.
But I do think, like, if you look at the peak playoff production, it's not that different. Like, the volume and efficiency is actually pretty similar, right? I talked about this with James Harden when you look at his playoff peak from 2017 to 2020, and he's averaging 29.5 points and over 7 assists a game on 58% true shooting, which I think was like a 1.5 above league average at the time. He does that, and we go, oh my God, what a disastrous dip, whereas other really good players, even including a guy like Luka, who again has given you in his playoff career comparable volume, a little bit more, 31 points, 8 assists on even true shooting. And with Luka, it's, oh my God, what a playoff riser, what a playoff monster. With Harden, it's what a disastrous playoff dropper. And by the way, I still think that Luka is a better playoff performer than Harden. And even though I don't really think of variety with Luka offensively, I do think the fact that he has more offensive variety, more of an ability to impose himself physically, I do prefer that to Harden. I do think he's also a better passer than Harden. Both very good, but I think Luka is the better passer. So he's a better playoff performer on a per-game basis. But again, it's just the totality of what Harden has done for me is so much more. And Harden did lead in terms of regular season offensive engine status to more elite regular season offenses throughout his career. So yes, there's a similar mold there, but I think in the regular season, Harden is actually more proven there even at his best. So I just have to disagree with that one. The one that I just think is absolutely insane. And again, we have a big gap here on Luka. It's an 18-spot gap. There is not a day in his life when Luka Doncic has been as good as peak David Robinson. And David Robinson did it for longer. So that to me is just completely inexcusable. David Robinson was a guy who was going to lead you to be absolutely dominant defenses. And he was also going to carry you to be a really good offense. He is one of the handful of greatest defensive players we've ever seen, and he was also an elite offensive player. And before Tim Duncan, he carried 5 Spurs teams to 55 wins. Luka has never led a team to 55 wins in his career, and Robinson probably had less help. Robinson's teams fell apart without him in historic fashion. He played with one All-Star in his pre-Duncan career, and it was Sean Elliott, who I like, but that is a very low-tier All-Star. So I just think Robinson at his best was a cheat code, man. The extent to which he was asked to carry his team on both ends, it is a truly unique thing in NBA history. And in the regular season, he did it as well as any big ever. And then in the playoffs, the dropping that we get on him for, he's still giving you 24, 12, and 3 on plus 2% relative true shooting from 1990 to 1996 with all-time great defense. He won more in the playoffs. I mean, in his pre-Duncan career, it was only one more playoff win, but still than Luka does up to this point in his career. And so I just don't see any angle there whatsoever when Robinson is also giving me, after his peak, after his major injury, with Duncan, he still gives you another 4 seasons of all-NBA level impact.
I'm becoming increasingly more offense-pilled.
But you can't just say that as an explanation, because it doesn't make sense. David Robinson was taking teams that were disastrous with him off the court. He's taking a team before he joins them. They won 21 games. He joins the team. They win 56 games. He's leading a team to 59 wins in 1996. You take him out of the picture. That's the biggest change. That and Sean Elliott missed half that season, and they win 20 games without him. You're talking about a guy who throughout his career, throughout his peak, 1990 to 1996, the Spurs are winning 67% of their games that he plays, and with him off the court, they're well below 500. They play one of the worst teams in the league. You can't just say, I'm getting more offense pilled when a player is at one of the greatest defensive levels we've ever seen and is also the centerpiece of really good offenses with a huge load. And you're not that offense pilled. You think Wemby is the best player in the world, even though he has offensive flaws. David Robinson, in terms of the impact path, it's quite similar, but he was asked to do even more offensively than Wemby. And he did it. He did it in the regular season.
I just think my team build is so easy around Luka with what he does offensively. I just think that if I can get I don't want to underrate what Luka did early on in his career too, where he's taking these, and I get that they're not going to these incredible regular season heights, but he's getting these teams without a ton of talent to the playoffs, and they're doing battle early on in his career.
But how is David Robinson's regular season floor-raising resume not way more impressive than that? You're giving Luka points for stuff that he didn't do nearly as well as Robinson. When you talk about the ease of the team build, what is easier than having a top 5 defensive anchor in NBA history who is also an extremely efficient 26-point-per-game scorer? If David Robinson was paired with high-level offensive talent before Duncan, the path to building a champion around him was so easy. I think Robinson is a guy who, when you again envision the best case scenario, he's got a ceiling raising skill set, right? Because it's like, okay, you drop him in and he's this elite play finishing big, really efficient, pure scorer. And then defensively, he's going to just absolutely transform the game. But he was asked to be a floor raiser for his entire peak. And he did it as well as any big we've seen in the history of this game, winning 55 games year in, year out with the teams he had around him. It's just like an unfathomable feat. So I just don't think you're giving him nearly enough credit. And when you talk about team build, man, like, give me Robinson every single day of the week. You can say your offense pilled, but there's two sides of the ball, and there's a level of defensive impact these great defensive anchors can achieve where, again, I think you could make arguments for Dikembe or Dwight Howard or even Rudy Gobert in like the top 50. David Robinson is clearly a better defender than all of those guys and was also an offensive number one on really good offenses with a huge load on his plate. It's just one of the greatest two-way peaks we've ever seen.
And I just think Luka's got at an all-time offensive peak. Like, I think that these 7 seasons out the gate from Luka are all-time offense.
But how do you overlook just the massive gap in impact, intangible impact between the two of them, where when Luka's off the floor, his teams do fine. When Luka's on the floor, his teams are pretty good. When David Robinson is on the floor, his teams are elite. When he's off the floor, his teams suck. His teams go from being among the best in the league to the worst in the league, just between if he is on the court or off the court. It just doesn't make sense.
I mean, I just think we're kind of going in circles here. Like, I think that Luka could be an offensive number one on a champion, and I don't really think David Robinson could.
Why do you keep only talking about offense when we're talking about one of the 5 greatest defenders in the history of the game compared to a negative defender? David Robinson so easily could be the best player on championship teams. There's an argument he was the best player on a championship team in 1999, and that was not even close to him at his best. He was asked to pick up the slack with teams that had well below average talent, and he was doing a level of floor raising in terms of the regular season that Tim Duncan didn't even do, that I don't know Akeem Olajuwon even did. And those guys are better playoff performers, but man, I just think there's something here that doesn't make sense with your calculus. In terms of how high Luka is, how low Robinson is, I think Harden's a little bit too low. Like, I don't know. I just think there's the sort of direct comparison between Luka and Harden because they are so similar, but Harden has just done it for way longer. And then I just think Robinson is just a substantially better player than Luka Doncic and higher peak, better longevity. So we can agree to disagree on that one, but I mean, we really, really disagree on that one. In my 29 spot, I have Scottie Pippen, who fell just outside your top 30, and he and Hondo fall into the similar category of being the super versatile elite number 2s who also do have like these sneaky resumes as number 1s that are good enough to get them into the top 30, but that's never what they were meant to do. With Scottie, it starts on the defensive end because he's arguably the greatest overall wing defender in NBA history. 6'8" with a 7'3" wingspan, elite size, elite length, freak athlete. Like, truly, one of the best vertical athletes we've seen, and that made him a strong secondary rim protector. It made him an elite defensive rebounder for the position, while he also has these great hands. He's extremely disruptive off ball in passing lanes, forcing steals, great instincts taking charges, like could guard a wide variety of players, especially the big wings and forward types. Like, just an extremely complete defender. And offensively, sort of the ultimate Swiss Army knife complementary forward when you look at what he did on both sides of the ball, because he was an elite passing forward, he was an elite offensive rebounder, he was a really good transition scorer, and then he was just like a decent shooter and a solid post-up ISO scorer. So when you think about Scottie, you think the guy is pretty much amazing at everything except for scoring, where he was still like a B, but he's an A++ overall defensive player. He's an A+ rebounder for the position. He's an A-level passer, like just so good at so much that if you pair him with a true offensive number 1, like a Michael Jordan or really anybody who we're talking about who can like be that lead player for a championship level offense, then Scottie is one of the best Robins that you could ever ask for. And that's where I do view him as more so a ceiling-raising player, somebody who you drop into a team, and as a number 2, he makes you substantially better on both sides of the ball by doing all these complementary things, but his defense is just flat-out game-breaking, and he's still a really good offensive player. And so over his time in Chicago, you see the difference where they were good without him. They won 61% of their games without him. But when he was on the floor, that's when they were like the greatest teams we've ever seen. And they won 72% of their games with him. So that's the case for Scottie. But I do think he has an underrated resume as the lead guy. And we do see that in terms of what he did famously in 1994 and 1995. 94, they lose in Game 7 to a Knicks team that went on to lose in Game 7 of the NBA Finals. That's without Michael Jordan. But overall, in Chicago, when Pippen was out there without Jordan, they won 61% of their games. Like, they were still a legitimately good team. You compare that to all of the other games that the Bulls played without Michael Jordan in Jordan's career, and they won 32% of their games. So, like, Scottie did show you an ability to still make a substantial impact as the best player on a team. Not to say that he's, again, an ideal offensive number one, but his defensive impact was so profound. His offensive versatility and overall impact was still good enough that he did do a really good job as the best player on a couple of really good teams, and overall gave you a decade of true star-level impact. And even after that, even after he leaves Chicago for the next 5 years, still legitimately contributed to really good teams in Houston and Portland in a smaller role. That only matters so much, but it does matter to me. It's not like his career just ends when he leaves Chicago. So the longevity overall is pretty good, but he was at his best the perfect number two for arguably the greatest dynasty in NBA history, which simply does not exist without him. And that's where I think it's a little bit different from Hondo, where you can say the Celtics had already won 5 championships when Hondo joined the team, and he was essential to what they did in the late 60s, obviously totally essential to what they did in 74 and 76 after Russell. But with Scottie Pippen, it's like once he becomes Scottie Pippen, the Bulls are unbeatable. Like, that is the turning point. That is the jumping off point for the dynasty, and I give him a ton of credit in that. I do think Michael Jordan had the highest peak of any player ever, but I think Scottie at his best was a top 5 level player who maybe the counting stats won't say that, but the impact absolutely would.
Yeah, I think the only thing really separating our ranking of Scottie on this list is like the difference in peak and longevity standards. We're not that far apart. I do have some other guys that, you know, obviously that haven't played as long, but I just do think peaked higher individually than a guy like Scottie. But I mean, I agree with a lot of what you said, man. When you're talking about a winning context, like a winning basketball player just in general, that's Scottie Pippen, man. He's going to do a little bit of everything for you, like the Swiss Army knife skill set. And Scottie's kind of that prototype, elite perimeter defender, one of the greatest of all time, if not the greatest. You know, that's a little bit of a debate. I think I would take Scottie as my all-time GOAT there. Some positional versatility on that end, too, in terms of defending players up. And then, like you're saying, man, just the complementary stuff, the rebounding. I think he gets underrated as a playmaker and decision maker as well. And then, you know, scoring obviously not his A1 trait, but could give it to you in spurts. Scottie's a winner, man, through and through, and I think that's the selling point on him.
And this is where I think like the number one versus number two thing can be a bit of a fallacy, because I look at a guy like James Harden or a Luka Doncic, right? And it's like, yeah, those guys are absolutely offensive number ones. They're good floor raisers. But when it comes to like, who do I think can play a major role and give me the best chance to win a championship? Like, I would take peak Scottie over the peak that we've seen from either of those guys. And again, the only reason I have Luka so much lower is because Scottie and Harden, the longevity is very comparable, whereas Luka has basically played for half as long as those guys. That's where I want to give Scottie his credit. That's where I want to give Hondo his credit. And really, I think a lot of it comes down to just defense being underrated. When you're talking about a guy who's a really good offensive player and is also one of the best defensive players ever and can do a lot of different things offensively, it's extremely easy to win championships with that guy, maybe as your second best player, but also to win a lot of games with that guy as your best player. And Scottie Pippen proved that, so I do wind up being pretty high on him, although I think that's kind of the typical range that he falls in. Who do you have at number 28, Logan?
You had this guy in last episode. This is where I ended up with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and I just think he has such an incredibly high all-time guard peak. I mean, he's coming off of a season in which he gave you 31-4 and 6.5 a night on 66.5% true shooting. We spouted out some of these numbers throughout the regular season, but he had the second highest true shooting percentage by a 30-point per game score in a single season in NBA history, up there with 2016 Steph Curry. And SGA just gives you such an incredible offensive floor. The guy scored 20 points in 140 straight regular season games. That is an NBA record. The consistent free throw generation in his 30-point per game seasons is giving you 9.3 free throw attempts per game. And one of the most underrated things that we always talk about with SGA is just the turnover suppression. 2.3 for his career, but in 30-point per game seasons has the two lowest turnover per game marks ever, which is just incredible. And when you're talking about that guy as your starting point for an offense, it's just so high. You add in the fact, Carson, like you've been mentioning with SGA, is that he is an impactful defensive player, right? He's got some versatility there as a shot blocker, a defensive playmaker. Not an elite defender, but in terms of what he can do as a cog in the machine, as an off-ball defender, defensive playmaker, and as an on-ball guy, like, that's just bonus points. Like, his ability to be a cog in the machine does matter a little bit to me in his ranking, but he's just such an elite offensive player, and the way that we see these teams slant their defenses to limit his impact is really incredible. I mean, in these playoffs, teams just outright blitzing him and putting two on the ball, out of pick and roll, trying to trap him. Like, you have to do these things as a defense to limit him because he is that kind of offensive player, and that's where I am comfortable having him up this high, even though he is such a young player. Like Luka, I do have some questions as to what's next for SGA. I will say, Luka, I wonder if he's just going to be stuck here in this spot. If he can climb any higher for a guy like SGA, I mean, to speak quite frankly, I would be disappointed if SGA one day isn't a top 20 kind of guy. I expect him to get there over the course of his career. Again, I would be disappointed if he doesn't crack that threshold. I could see him going top 15, but top 20 is where I would draw the line of I'm disappointed if one day SGA is not a consensus or not up there in my own personal ranking. But I talk about what's next for Luka, what's next for SGA. I think number one above everything else is just adding more shot variety, adding more layers to his scoring skill set where SGA's changed the standard. The bar for SGA was already so high. With what teams are doing to him in the playoffs, the bar has gotten even higher where it's like, okay, you're the best player on the planet. You're the second, you're a top 3 guy on the planet, wherever you want to rank him. Now it's, can you score through these defenses? Can you enhance your team offense even when you're taking on this kind of defensive coverage? The standard has just changed for SGA. So I look for adding more shot variety. I look for the Thunder to try to really max out what he can do as an off-ball scorer, and just figuring out how to beat these incredible coverages. I already think his offensive floor is so high. Can he raise it in the playoffs, and can he fully unlock his ceiling in the playoffs as well? That's the next step for him. So I'm comfortable with having him here right now, but I do expect as time goes on for SGA to climb up into the top 25 and then into the top 20 later in his career. But I can't just, pencil him in right there now. He's got to prove it in the playoffs, and I think we saw that reality in the playoffs this year. But I wholeheartedly think he already belongs in the top 30 with what he's proven. He's at such an unbelievably high peak right now.
Once again, this is just coming down to a difference in criteria. And also, I think Shai, in terms of the regular season, is at like a top 10-ish peak that we've ever seen. I think he's coming off of like one of the great 2-year regular season stretches we've ever seen. I think he's essentially a flawless regular season player, like GOAT level regular season scorer in terms of the volume and efficiency, especially the ability to just do it out of pick and roll isolation, put the ball in his hands, and he can create with such massive volume and efficiency. Plus playmaker, protects the ball so well, plus defender, everything you said. I think it is so easy to build a dominant team around Shai because of all the different things that he does at a plus level, because you can put this great defense around him and he can be a positive part part of it while he carries this massive offensive load. I think you could also shift to a more offensive-centric team build around Shai, and if you spread out and put really high-level shooting and play finishing around him, now he's going to have more space to work with. As a scorer, he might become even more efficient. Like, playmaking becomes even easier for him while he's still a slight plus defender. Like, that formula is just so damn easy. I will say, and I did say when I ranked Shai, like, if he had had a dominant playoff run this year, then I think I would have him already in the same spot that you do, or maybe higher. But it is the fact that we haven't quite seen it translate at the same insane level that it's been in the regular season. And I do think Shai will get better. There's no projection involved in this list, but just personally, he is a guy who has gotten better every year, who does add layers to his game every year. And I do think that off-ball scoring is the next priority for him, taking things up a level there. And then also the fact that we're just talking about like 4 years of Shai being a top 5 player, 2 years of him making a good case for being best player in the world. As high as I am on the peak, especially in the regular season, when I think about my criteria, it matters how long you do it at a high level for, how many chances you give me to win championships with you in a major role. And at this point, Shai's just 27. That's kind of what it comes down to. In my 28 spot, I have Moses Malone, Logan. And I know you love Moses because he's a Virginia boy. I'm just not high on Moses. And I've always been low on him. I'm lower on him now than I was even a few years ago when we ranked the top 25 players in NBA history, and he barely cracked my list. Now he's outside of the list. And Moses is interesting because he's kind of divisive in terms of like historical conversations, because for being a 3-time MVP, he doesn't get talked about that much, right? He doesn't have the sort of gravitas that other 3-time MVPs do. And so people go, oh, Moses is underrated. But then I also think he's overrated by a lot of people because he has the 3 MVPs. Like, I just think there's a lot of context that needs to be given when we talk about that with Moses. And even though he was the best player on one of the great teams in NBA history in 1983, he was also dropped onto a team that was already excellent, a team that had been elite and towards the top of the NBA for years. And so when I look at him in a vacuum, when I look at the impact of Moses Malone, my criteria, I just don't think he was top 25 level impactful. And I just kept going through the guys in this range, and I was like, yeah, in a vacuum, I would rather have that guy for their career than I would Moses Malone. So let's talk about some of those things that I think can be a little bit misleading in terms of the legend of Moses. First of all, you have to understand the Sixers team that he joined. It was a team that had just won 58 games, lost in Game 6 of the NBA Finals, and they were able to acquire Moses without giving up any major pieces. They traded Caldwell Jones, so they still had Bobby Jones, Andrew Toney, Dr. J, Mo Cheeks, all of these guys who had been essential parts of the 82 team that almost won the title. And it was a core that the year before that, 1981, went to Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals, losing to the eventual champs, and they had won 62 games. The year before that, they won 59 games, and they lost in Game 6 of the Finals. Like, I just think when you talk about a player being dropped onto a great team and then putting them over the top and winning a championship, outside of Kevin Durant to the Warriors, which is totally in a class of its own, I'm not comparing this to that whatsoever, but like after that, when you're talking about you drop a great player onto an already great team, Moses to the Sixers is the next example that I think of. And so that context matters to me, that he put them over the top, but it was already a great team with one of the most talented top 5s in NBA history, and just overall a collective Sixers group that I'm really high on, because we'll talk about Dr. J at some point in this series. Andrew Toney was an elite playoff performer. Mo Cheeks, really good two-way guard. Bobby Jones, one of the best defenders ever and a good offensive player. Like, Moses was great. I think he was probably the best player in the world in 1983, but the context is still important. And then you look at the Rockets years, and they're very interesting because he joined a Rockets team that was already really good offensively, that had the number 1 offense before Moses joined the team, built around Calvin Murphy and Rudy T and Mike Newlin. And then Moses gets there, and in his second year, like, the Rockets sucked. And they sucked because Rudy T was hurt, Mike Newlin missed some time. Moses that year, it's just an incredible stat. He had 31 assists to 220 turnovers. As we often say, I would probably argue the worst passing star in NBA history. It's like either him or Dwight Howard, but a cool 1-7 assist to turnover ratio. And then it's the next year when those guys come back healthy around him, Rudy T and Mike Newlin, and they add Rick Barry, who was well past his prime, but still a very good offensive player, that the Rockets come back to being a number one offense, and they're a 47-win team. And Moses improves a bit that year, but Moses gets MVP kind of inexplicably to me, because the resurgence of the Rockets was really about all of those guys coming back and coming in, and then Moses improving was part of it, but they also weren't even close to an elite team that year because their defense sucked, and Houston's defenses always sucked. Like, they were a below average defense, I believe, every single year that Moses was in Houston, frequently like towards the bottom of the league, which I do think speaks to his lack of upper echelon defensive impact. When we compare him to a lot of other great bigs, well, a lot of great bigs make their case on being two-way giants. Moses was a good defender. He was a part of a great defense in 83 with the Sixers, but on his own, like, he could definitely be the defensive center on some of the worst defenses in the NBA, and he was for a long time because he wasn't that impactful. So that first MVP, 1979, I think is a very weak MVP, and I think it comes in a very weak MVP race where his comp is like George Gervin and Elvin Hayes, and Kareem just wasn't going to win it because of voter fatigue at this point, most likely. So that context matters to me. Then 1982, Moses wins MVP for a 46-win Rockets team that was actually 14th of 23 teams in net rating. Kind of crazy. That's another weak race. And I actually think that probably already should have gone to Larry Bird, even though he wasn't at his peak yet. I do think that Bird, to me, was already the better, more impactful player at that point. And so the thing with Moses is he's very unique. He's a GOAT offensive rebounder. He is an efficient volume paint scorer. He was extremely strong. Like, he could play bully ball. And he had great timing on the offensive glass. He was a good post scorer. He was a massive free throw drawer. Like, he was a scoring machine. 1979 and 1986, he gives you almost 26 points per game on plus 4% true shooting. That was his value. But he is like the worst passer ever. I mean, he was giving you 1.3 assists to 3.1 turnovers a game, which is insane. And so he's a weird guy to build an offense around because of that, because he wasn't really a creator. He wasn't somebody who could make plays for others at all, at like even a passable level. He was this black hole who could be efficient around the paint, really good on the offensive glass. And defensively, as I said, he's a solid rim protector. He's a great rebounder, only a decent athlete, could be a positive contributor on a great defense, but spent most of his career on very bad defenses that he couldn't meaningfully improve. And so that's where I think he is just not a top 25 player I would want to build my team around. I think also the reality is Moses like put up empty numbers on shitty teams for a while, but after 1986, he falls off in terms of like real high level impact to me. And so he kind of only gives you like 8 meaningful, really good elite seasons. So the longevity is ultimately just kind of okay to me. And so there's all these things that people point to with Moses, and I just think he gets a little bit too much credit for. Another one is getting the 1981 Rockets to the NBA Finals. And like, absolutely, that was a team that did not have the talent of an NBA Finals team, but also the West at that time, outside of the Lakers, sucked, right? Like, they beat a 40-win Kings team in the conference finals. Now, they did beat the Lakers in the first round, but that was in a best-of-3 series, and so there's just a little bit of weirdness there in terms of that run. 1982, he gets the Rockets to win 46 games, and then after he leaves, the Rockets immediately fall to 14 wins, and so that gets pointed to in terms of Moses' impact, and obviously that matters, but I also think it matters that Robert Reed also left, Mike Dunleavy also left, and the team just decided to tank. Like, it was just a total timeline pivot. It's kind of like when people point to like the 2011 Cavs and they're like, oh my God, that's singularly how valuable LeBron was. Look at how much they fell off. And it's like, well, obviously LeBron is insanely valuable, but also the team went from trying to win as many games as they can to trying to lose as many games as they can. So I do think Moses was very good. That goes without saying. I'm not trying to take away from him. I guess I'm just focusing on the negatives here because I know I'm lower on Moses than most people, and these are the reasons why.
We're gonna do it again, man. The old classic Moses Malone debate. I couldn't leave a Petersburg, Virginia legend any lower. I think I might have him. I don't remember where I had him when we did this list in our top 25. He was in my top 25. He might be in the exact same spot. I have him at 21, so he would have been the last guy that we talked about today. We've had this debate before. I don't feel that quite differently about Moses, and I thought you brought up a lot of good context about him. I do think that Moses can get overrated a little bit because of some of the scoring numbers and the attribution that we talk about. Honestly, attribution is one of the biggest things that Carson and I talk about across sports in general. If it's the classic quarterback win attribution debate, if it's the best player on a championship team attribution debate, which I think is more similar to a guy like Moses. And I think you bring up a great point in saying that Moses probably gets some more credit than he deserves because that is an all-time great basketball team. And that context is really important when we're talking about those Sixers. It is an older Dr. J, but it is still a very effective Dr. J. Andrew Toney was a bucket getter. Bobby Jones was a defensive clamp. Mo Cheeks was a really great defender and an awesome playmaker. Like, when we're talking about that squad, you got to mention the totality of that roster and how complementary all of those skill sets are to one another, man. You just have guys slotted into perfect roles, but it always comes back to Moses because Moses was the best player, and of course because you've got the classic faux. They don't end up going exactly faux. They go faux 5-4, but it is it's an all-time great basketball team, and Moses is the best player on that team, and he is such a unique player. Some of the scoring numbers I do think get inflated because of what a good rebounder he was and how many of those opportunities are coming just off of his own misses.
I will say, to give Moses a little bonus point, he's already an efficient scorer. He is certainly a more efficient scorer than true shooting percentage would even tell you, because if you put up a shot, miss, grab your own offensive rebound, and then score off of that, that counts as 2 shot attempts, but it's effectively 1 attempt, right? It's 1 scoring attempt. You're only using 1 possession, and so Moses would get a big efficiency boost from just how much he cleaned up his own offense.
Yeah, I was saying that not in terms of efficiency, more of in the volume, but I think that context is important, and the playmaking limitations are real. So I'm not gonna, I have nothing to say on the playmaking. It is kind of ridiculous to look back at that any player of this stature was that comically limited as a passer and playmaker, but Moses is super unique. I think he is an all-time rebounder. I think he is the GOAT offensive rebounder.
Yep.
I think he is an underrated defender, and an underrated part of his scoring efficiency and impact is the free throw generation and how often he got to the line and how effective for a big man he was from the line. You know, for his career, he's like 76 or 77% from the line, so he's not like comically limited in the way some of these other non-skilled bigs are. So I think I think you're right to question some of the impact and some of the attribution when it comes to him getting the accolades and the legacy that come. You know, there is a lot that comes with the 3 MVP awards and the taking teams to the finals. What I always come back to, and what I came back to, I believe, during our top 25 players debate and where we disagreed on Moses, and I think we'll probably disagree here again on this, but I just think that his skill set in that time period was more valuable than what it would be in the modern era, and I know that's not your debate. I think you just disagree fundamentally on how valuable it was back then as well, but I just think it is a really valuable skill set for that era. I think the fact that Moses is among the best at one attribute in NBA history, and that being the offensive rebounding, bumps him up for me. I just think that is incredible that I can say, all right, I'm going to get the best guy of all time in this one category. And again, I think there are some other areas in which he can get a little bit underrated. I think as a defender, he's a little bit underrated all time, and I think I just think can kind of get underappreciated. But I don't think we fundamentally look at Moses different. I do disagree a little bit on the longevity point. I agree with you that he wasn't at his apex in those later years. I still think he was an effective player up until like age 34, which I think his longevity can get overstated for just how long he played in general. But I do think his impact went a little bit further than you were saying earlier with just the Philly years. I think he was effective for a few more years after that. But I think our differences on Moses are very, very marginal. But he's a Petersburg legend. I famously said on this show, my dad did score a layup on him one time. So shout out my pops.
For real.
I love Moses. Moses played ball like 30 minutes from where I grew up, so I love Moses. I got a soft spot for him, and I couldn't leave him outside of my top 25.
Yeah, in terms of the longevity, like I think 87 to 90 are still like good years, but I would say 88 to 90, he's no longer giving you like star level impact, and he's kind of just getting his numbers. And then in terms of the value of his skill set, like I say he's a very weird player to build an offense around. He was the best player on a lot of really good offenses. Like he's a very valuable offensive player, but then also, again, the help was so substantial. The infrastructure was so good. He joined a Philly team that was already a top 5 offense every single year. He joined a Houston team that was already the number 1 offense. And that's where I just think he can get a disproportionate amount of credit because, as you're saying, like the accolades are what people will usually point to, and accolades don't matter to me because there's just so much context. Voters get stuff wrong, and just like fundamentally, not all MVPs are equal, not all finals appearances are equal, and what matters to me is impact. That's what I'm talking about here. And in terms of impact, I don't think that Moses is quite at that top 25 level. I don't think 21 is an egregious ranking of him. I will once again bring up David Robinson, though, because I just think like David Robinson clears. If you drop David Robinson on a 58-win team, Logan, they were going to win 76 games, nuke the entire NBA, be the greatest team ever. Well, so that's what I'll say about that. The defensive gap is just so big, and then offensively, I think they fall in the same range.
Well, David Robinson would have been a child then, so you would need a time machine.
Oh, shit, that's a good point. You couldn't drop him on the 83 Sixers on account he would have been in middle school. Logan, you've got me once again. Okay, who is in your 27 spot?
This is one of the toughest guys to rank on this list. I don't remember if I had him in our top 25. I may have dropped him a few spots. This is where I ended up with Kawhi Leonard, and Kawhi's just so difficult to rank, man, for such a myriad of different reasons. It's the fact that Kawhi has, one, grown so much as a player, right? And I think that's probably the biggest dilemma is just the lack, and we talked about this multiple times when talking about Kawhi historically, but the lack of overlap with all of his best qualities in one version makes him so interesting to rank. Just the fact that he's, this peak defender with the Spurs, I'd say until like his final season with the Raptors. He's still a really effective defender even to this day, right? But like the absolute apex and peak of Kawhi's defense to me comes from like 2014 to 2019. And never during that run are you getting the peak offensive version of Kawhi, where the peak offensive version of Kawhi is 2020 to 2026, and he's still an effective offensive player now, even though he's lost some of this burst in athleticism on ball and explosiveness because he's so strong and such an elite jump shooter. I'd say the best and most complete version of Kawhi is 2019 with the Raptors, but I think it's important to contextualize that he hadn't fully refined and rounded out his offensive game to the level that he does in Los Angeles. It's an incredible jump shooting run. It's a great version, but when we're looking in hindsight, we can kind of mythologize and just blindly attribute some of these qualities that he has developed with the Clippers that he just didn't have with the Raptors. And he had a lot of great infrastructure with Toronto, and that's a great basketball team as well around Kawhi Leonard. And again, all these things just make him so difficult to rank. And the Clippers years are so fantastic and amazing to me. The fact that he is absolutely one of the best jump shooters, three-point shooters, pull-up jump shooters on the planet. He has developed a super tight handle. He is this really good decision maker and playmaker. Not one of the best on the planet, but high enough to where he is a real offensive engine and driver, and you can trust him to initiate and run offense for you at this stage in his career and just get to his spots. And then you come back to it, and the thing that probably makes Kawhi harder to rank than anybody else is just his availability and health concerns. The fact that since 2018, the guy has played in just 54% of his regular season games, and you don't know if in the playoffs if he's going to be available. I say all of this to just lay it out and set the stage for Kawhi and just what makes his case so unique and so difficult. So I come back to him at 27. I know you ranked him already at 31 on your list. Yep. He's just tough, man. I love watching Kawhi. I think he is an artist, man. Like I just think Kawhi is a beautiful player to watch. I think his skill set is so valuable. But yeah, he's one of the most complex players in NBA history to rank because of all these reasons I laid out. When I came back to ranking Kawhi, I just asked myself one simple question. And I came back to this for a lot of guys, if I was struggling with them. If he retired today, if I didn't get any other game out of Kawhi, where would I feel comfortable placing him? This is where I ended up. And I kind of hesitate to see Kawhi climbing any higher on my list. This feels about right, just with, again, all the concerns that I have laid out, the lack of the peak overlapping and the two-way stuff. Like, this feels about right. I just couldn't get him into that upper echelon 25 spot with the availability concerns, with the longevity, and again, with his apex peak form not ever really fully coming together in a big way. So I come back with him at 27 here.
We'll see, man. Kawhi is still insanely good when he's on the court. Obviously, the question remains, how much is he going to be on the court? And that's why I have Kawhi at 31. I think the peak is extremely high. I think he's got a tremendous resume in terms of the impact that he's had on team success. I think he's got one of the great combinations of scoring and defense that we've ever seen. And when you do drop him onto a talented team where he has a good offensive support system around him and he can just be that insanely effective, hyper-efficient volume scorer who can do it on and off ball, who is then also an elite defender, that's the perfect situation for Kawhi to take a team from solid, good, to great championship level. And that's kind of always been when he's at his best. And so the value of that is supreme. It's just, since he became a superstar, he's finished 4 postseasons healthy. And so there's just a lack of availability and longevity there that keeps Kawhi just outside my top 30, even though I do think the peak is extremely high. In my 27 spot, I have a guy who I weirdly think of with Kawhi, even though they're very different players, just because like there are certain guys who like have the one run and they stand out. They're these sort of standalone, incredibly impressive title runs. This is where I have Rick Barry.
Wow. Okay.
And I think of 1975 with him as absolutely his peak. 1967 is when he's averaging 35 a game and he gets that team to the finals. But I just think by 75, the playmaking leap he had taken was so substantial that he was the better offensive player. Over the course of his career, gives you 25, 7, and 5 on average efficiency, essentially. But I think with Rick Barry, oftentimes people look at the crazy scoring numbers, and that's the first thing that stands out. I truly believe his greatest offensive value was his passing. When you're talking about 74 to 76, when he leads 3 straight top 2 offenses, he does lead a team to a championship. Like, he could score with extreme volume, and he could stress the defense from everywhere on the floor, and he was a dynamic pull-up shooter. He was also a really good off-ball mover and an active cutter. Like, you could do a lot of things with Rick Barry as a scorer, but the passing, to me, he was so creative, so adaptive. First king of the jump pass in NBA history. Great positional size that allowed him to see so much. He could make those quick touch, high field passes, and I do consider him to be the first great playmaking forward, and that was just like such an incredible part of his offensive game. To be that level of scorer and that level of playmaker is a rare thing to have from a forward in NBA history. And then defensively, he could hold his own. He had great hands. He was a steal-forcing machine. So a guy who was an elite offensive player, a solid defender, and in 75 really did have one of the great carry jobs that we've seen in NBA history in terms of getting that team to win a championship. Now, it was the mid-late 70s when things were certainly more open for the taking in terms of titles, but still, to take that team where young Jamal Wilkes, he was known as Keith Wilkes at the time, that's how young he was, is your second best player. Like, you don't have much offensive help, and you're able to lead that team to being an elite offense, averaging 28, 6, and 6. I do value that peak a lot, and the longevity with Rick Barry is solid. I would say the knocks on him are that he wasn't somebody who was like an automatic walking elite offense throughout his career. And I think part of that is the scoring efficiency limitations he had at times. Part of that is in his early years, like really the first couple years, being so score first and not being as developed as a passer. But again, there's not many forwards who are single-handedly leading you to be an elite offense in NBA history. And at his best, Rick Barry was one of those guys. So it's more so, I guess, just not being a freakish enough outlier offensively to put him higher than this, but I do think Rick Barry's peak was very high, and so I wind up with him at number 27.
Yeah, this actually is going to flow really nicely. I have him at 26. Rick's just ahead of his time, kind of do-it-all wing, man. And you do come back to the scoring. I mean, the guy is 25 to 30, does it on decent efficiency a few years, always normally had the volume, and ahead of his time, elite jump shooter. You mentioned the off-ball scoring, and you think back to some of the moments with Rick, they're amazing. 55 points in an NBA Finals game, tied second with Michael Jordan just behind Elgin Baylor. 40.8 points per game in that final series. Number 2, just to Michael Jordan, and the playmaking was a huge strength and quality of his. It developed as he got older. He's a good rebounder, too, 7 to 8 a night. I don't think he was a great or super consistent defender. That was a criticism of Barry's throughout his career, but he was a solid defensive playmaker and great steal generator. I'd say why he isn't higher, the absolute apex kind of high-level two-way impact and peak, and then the lack of all-time. And I really want to emphasize all-time longevity, because I think Barry does have good longevity, but as it compares to some of the guys higher in this range, it doesn't stand out in a way that would really elevate him to the upper echelons at this list. But incredible versatility, and like I said, just in ahead of his time, kind of do-it-all versatile wing, man. I think Rick definitely really belongs in this range, although some of his peers may omit him from this list because he's just a dick.
Just a dick for sure, but hell of a ball player. I think you laid it out well. I mean, really great offensive forward, not one of the top tier offensive engines in NBA history. Defense is just okay, but not making a real plus impact there. The longevity is good, not great. I think those reasons are why we landed in a very similar spot with Rick Barry. The last thing I do want to give him credit for is just he is one of those guys who from the day he set foot in the league to the day he left was just a really good player. And as I mentioned, the last couple of years in Houston, he is not close to what he was at his best, but as a rookie, he was a 26-point-per-game scorer. In year 2, again, he did lead a team to the finals and then really peaks offensively in his early 30s and leads some great offenses in those years, and then goes to Houston, and he's 34 years old, and he's a huge part of a number one offense, as I mentioned, and is used more in a playmaking first role and actually sets a career high in assists per game, takes that team from being a good offense back to being the number one offense in the NBA. And after he leaves, their offense does fall off by a bit as well. So definitely a great offensive player and a guy who probably doesn't get enough credit overall, but also definitely was a dick. And so I think that factors in for some people maybe.
Creatine is one of the most researched and effective supplements available, but as the category has exploded, most brands have focused on flavors, formats, and marketing instead of actually making the creatine itself better. That's why we partnered with Momentous, where you can always know and trust that the ingredients in their supplements are quality tested, especially with their new signature spec creatine.
The Signature Spec Creatine is the most advanced creatine ever, and it's setting a new standard for creatine quality. It delivers 10 times fewer impurities, microplastic screening, 2 to 5 times tighter heavy metal limits, and the product experience has been improved with an ultra-fine powder that mixes effortlessly. Also, the benefits of creatine are real. It supports strength, power, lean muscle growth, recovery, and even improved cognitive performance. I take creatine every day because I want to be huge and massive. And if you're going to take creatine every day, you might as well make sure it's the best and choose Momentous Signature Spec Creatine. That's what I've done. I feel better about what I'm taking every day, and that's why we've partnered with Momentous.
If you want to try Momentous Signature Spec Creatine, head to livemomentous.com and use code NERDSESH for up to 35% off your entire first order. That's livemomentous.com, promo code NERDSESH for up to 35% off. That's livemomentous.com, promo code NERDSESH.
Who do I have at number 26, Logan, is the question. And I have Steve Nash, who I do think is absolutely a top-tier offensive engine in NBA history. In fact, I think he has an argument for having the highest offensive peak ever. I wouldn't make the argument, but I think there's an argument to be made because nobody has a better resume of driving historically great offenses, which, by the way, translated to the playoffs. Some of the best regular season offenses we've ever seen. I mean, he led 6 of the top 20 relative offenses in NBA history. One man, he led 8 number one offenses in 9 years. Over 8 years in Phoenix, they posted a plus 10 relative offensive rating in his minutes. That's 8 years of sustaining GOAT-level offense when he's on the court. And when he's off the court, they're a -2 relative offense. They're below average. That's what he did in the regular season. But then in the playoffs in Phoenix, he posted a plus 9 relative offensive rating in his minutes, and the Suns were an even offense without him. They were an average offense without him. So the totality of that impact, I just don't know how you can deny that this is one of the very greatest offensive players we've ever seen. Now, people do try to deny it, and the reason for that is pretty much because Steve Nash doesn't have the biggest scoring numbers. But what you have to understand is he is one of the greatest offensive players we've ever seen. He is a top 3 passer in NBA history, but he also was an elite scorer who just chose to leverage his constant offensive threat and the pressure that he applied to the defense into playmaking first, where he is feeding his teammates rim assists in a way we've never seen other than Magic Johnson. Like, he could beat you offensively in either way. We saw that in the playoffs. I come back to this series a lot, but it's because it is such a masterclass in scoring from Steve Nash, where 2005 versus Dallas in games 4 through 6, they say, all right, Nash has been killing us as a playmaker. Amare's been killing us feeding off of that. Let's try to make Nash a scorer with our coverages. And what he did over those final 3 games was give them 40 points, 9 rebounds, 10 assists on 71% true shooting. He had that takeover gear as a scorer. It's just not something that he preferred to go to like a Magic Johnson, right? Like that playmaking first mindset doesn't mean that he wasn't one of the greatest offensive players we've ever seen, because he was a top 3 shooter in NBA history. Like, truly absurd what he was doing, mostly off the dribble, where he's 50% from mid-range every year. He's 45% from 3 consistently. 45% from 3. He had this lethal floater game, and he's one of the best ball handlers we've ever seen. An incredible ability to shift past people and control the ball in tight spaces and get deep into the paint and then twist the defense around and manipulate them and just attack and manipulate space. Nash was so remarkable at that, mostly to open things up for his teammates and feed them. But if you gave him a little bit of airspace, he was such a lethally efficient scorer from all over the floor that he could kill you like that. And so again, it was his scoring threat, his ability to attack, pressure the defense with the ball, that led to these all-time great offenses. He's one of the most efficient scorers in NBA history, led the league in true shooting percentage twice as a guard. That's an incredible feat. Also, one of the great transition players we've ever seen. And when you talk about hunting easy offense, creating easy offense, Nash is just like maybe the GOAT at that. And offense is supposed to be easy, man. You don't get extra points for making it look hard. Nash made it extraordinarily easy for his team. And that's where I do come back to the idea of the aggression. I love the aggression that Steve Nash played with, hunting early offense, always hunting the best shot possible, whether it was for himself or a teammate, and he did that. He's also the greatest pick and roll player in NBA history. He was an extremely efficient isolation scorer. When he did spot up, he was a knockdown shooter off the catch, but for the most part, you just put the ball in his hands and you put pretty good play finishers around him, pretty good shooters. He's going to lead you to be one of the greatest offenses in NBA history. That's what he did throughout his time in Phoenix, and the resume there is just unbelievable. He's clearly the best offensive player in the NBA, at least from 05 to 07. You could argue beyond that, but that 3-year peak, it's just stupid. He won 2 MVPs. He deserved both of them. He damn near won a third in 2007, and people look back and they're like, oh, Steve Nash? And it's like, yes, Steve Nash. Absolutely Steve Nash. He joined in 2005 a 29-win team. That was the Suns, who already had Amare, who already had Sean Marion, and he made them a 62-win team, and not just the number 1 offense in the NBA by far, coming from being the number 21 offense the previous season. He made them a top 2 relative offense in NBA history. And you know who's number 1, Logan? It's a team that Steve Nash was on with Dirk Nowitzki in Dallas. So he led the best offenses ever. They translated to the playoffs. The offenses consistently fell apart without him. Like, if the most valuable thing you can be is an elite offensive engine, which I think is generally the consensus thought, right? Steve Nash is in the top tier ever there, and that's why in Phoenix, his teams were so great. They had a plus 7.5 net rating with him on the court. He had a plus 10 on-off swing. I mentioned how much he transformed them in 2005. It's one of the greatest single-season turnarounds ever, the greatest single-season offensive turnaround ever, and you tie so much of it to this one player. But overall, in his Phoenix tenure, when he played from 2005 to 2012, they won 65% of their games. They were an elite team and, again, historic offenses. When he missed time, they went 11-26. They won under 30% of their games without him. So for all these reasons, I think Nash clearly belongs here. The only knocks on him are the defense, because he was just a really bad defender. Now, that easily could have been worked around with the right team build, and that's where the Suns' defenses are what failed in the playoffs, but it's not like, oh, that's Steve Nash's fault. It's like, yeah, he was a bad defender as a small guard. We've seen teams work around that throughout NBA history. Unfortunately, they just did not have the defensive personnel they needed. And the longevity with him is solid, but it's not great because he doesn't blossom into a star until 2001 in Dallas, and then he doesn't blossom until an MVP level guy until 2005 when he's fully unlocked. He still gives you more than a decade of star level value and a multi-year MVP level peak, but he's an interesting player because there's 18 years of Steve Nash, but he was obviously a late bloomer. But in terms of the offense, like, no notes, man. I couldn't be higher on Nash, and I just think that's kind of the only rational place to end up, honestly. Like, the more you dig into Steve Nash, the higher you become on his offense because it's such a ridiculous resume.
Well said. I mean, we don't differ. We're not far off. I debated having Nash one spot lower. I have him in my 24 spot. And,
okay.
I mean, I think you summed it all up really well. I don't really know what people think of Steve Nash, but we are known appreciators of him, and the numbers can underwhelm you just on a page. Like, if you're just looking at it on Basketball Reference, you go, oh, the guy's 14, 3-9 for his career. But when you dive into the impact and how much it translated to team offense and to the playoffs, like we said, again, that's the other consistent knock, right, is that the numbers don't blow you away, and then the other knock is the fact that Steve Nash doesn't have a championship ring, and they'll go, oh, he won the MVPs and the team offense success, so why didn't he win a ring? And I don't want to have this, like, double standard. I think that a lot of guys, like you mentioned, Carson, it is important to mention, sometimes it is luck-based, and sometimes you get unlucky, right? And if it's Joel Embiid and his injury luck, if it's James Harden and, you know, having Chris Paul get injured and his bad luck, like, there is luck involved in winning a championship. I do think Steve Nash had some bad luck when it came to the playoffs, with guys getting injured, with guys getting suspended in key series, like, you know, Amari missing an entire season and the Suns not missing a beat. I mean, that is incredibly impressive to me. That's a chapter of Steve Nash's career that kind of gets overlooked a little bit. And also, I do think the longevity balance is an important one with Steve Nash, where, like you said, from the gates onset, he's not a superstar. But I do think the fact that early on with those Dallas teams, even though he's not the number one, those are elite offenses that he is a major part of, and the fact that at the tail end of his career in Phoenix, even though he's not his absolute apex, he is still enhancing all of his teammates and leading out some really good offenses, even when he's not his absolute best. So his longevity's not A1, it's still pretty good. Yeah. And again, I just think some of the criticisms of Steve Nash, not that they're not valid, I think they get overblown 100%. To a point that completely discredit him as a player in a way that isn't based in reality. I love Steve Nash. I think he is one of the handful of greatest offensive players of all time. I think he is brilliant. He always enhanced his teammates. And just when we're talking about, and we talk about this in our best offensive players of all time, like, for a half-court player, Steve Nash is just one of the most valuable you could have. He is one of the all-time puppet masters in NBA history. He is going to put you in an action, he is going to get to the spot he wants, and he is either going to make a brilliant decision to get his teammate an easy look, or he is going to get to his own spot and get a wide-open jumper, and he can kill you from anywhere on the floor. You said my favorite line in your spiel and the one that I think needs to get hammered home more than anything else about Steve Nash, you shouldn't get bonus points for making offense look hard. Steve Nash made offense easy, and it led to elite offensive results, and Steve Nash should not be punished because he made the game look so easy offensively. So,
100%.
Like I said, we are known appreciators and glazers of Steve Nash, but I think he's got to be in this range, and I've got him just inside my top 25 at 24.
Yeah, I love it. I think that this has to be the range for him. I'm glad that you brought up the 06 season because that's just another feather in his cap of all-time great offense when Amare goes out and there's still a top 2 offense in the NBA. It's like, it's quite simple. People try to say, oh, it's D'Antoni, oh, it's the totality of the offense. It's like, no. When Steve Nash was on the court, they played like the greatest offense in NBA history when he was in Phoenix. When he was off the court, they were completely mediocre. Like, it really is that simple, and it's unfortunate how, as you're saying, the counting stats, because when you say the numbers, I mean, there's a lot of numbers that paint Steve Nash as one of the GOATs, right? When you look at the efficiency across play types, when you look at the offensive on-off stuff, all that stuff paints him as one of the greatest offensive players ever. If people look at points per game, then they're going to underappreciate Steve Nash. But I think we have to understand that there are just so many ways to impact a basketball game. And your job as a great offensive player is not purely to score the basketball. It is to create great shots for your team. And that is what Steve Nash, in terms of the decision-making, the offensive process, was maybe the best ever at doing. And that's what matters.
And I was going to say, I think that you've brought this up, and I'm a victim of one of these for sure. I think as we've been ranking these top 50 players, I think normally, traditionally, through regular rankings, I think 2 skill sets get more undervalued than anything else. I probably am underrating defense a little bit in this top 50 player ranking, but the other skill set that I think traditionally gets a little bit underrated is playmaking.
100%. 100%. Scoring tends to steal the show. But again, Nash was such a good scorer. It's like the thing with him, there's just such a cheat code, is it's like he can make shots that are not supposed to be that efficient at a crazy efficient clip. When you can hit off the dribble jumpers at the level that he can, where he's the most efficient volume jump shooter in basketball every single year, and then you are also like one of the 2 most creative and audacious passers we've ever seen, and one of the greatest ball handlers we've ever seen, like, he's just a cheat code. He's just an offensive cheat code, and I love him for that. That being said, in my 25 spot, I do have a guard who I think is ever so slightly easier to build a dominant team around, and that's Dwyane Wade.
We're going beat for beat, man.
Hell yeah. There we go. Now we're hitting a stride. Now we're in rhythm. I thought our list would start to get more similar once we got higher up into the top 25 kind of range, and it seems like that's happening. Dwyane Wade was just a ridiculous player for 7 seasons. Like, one of the greatest drivers and rim pressuring guards ever. Absolutely insane combination of ball handling, change in pace, insane pure speed, elite bounce, the flexibility and body control in the paint. Like, just one of those guys who is built to get to the rim when he wants. And that was the core of him being such an effective elite offensive player, but also one of the best passing shooting guards in NBA history, a guy who could act as the primary ball handler for an offense, who could make high-level reads, and who also just collapsed the defense over and over again. So he pressured you so much, and he was able to parlay that into really high-level playmaking. He also had an elite floater game and was pretty good with the mid-range. Not an elite mid-range shooter for sure, but it was a legitimate counter that he had, so it's not like he was purely an at-rim scorer. He definitely had the intermediate game to complement that. Some of the peak seasons out of him are so insanely impressive. People always, or not always, but often look to the 2006 playoffs first because that's when he wins a championship, and that's a dominant run. He gives you 28, 6, and 6 on plus 5% relative true shooting and wins a title with a team that was just not meant to win at all. When you look at the talent around him, when you look at the version of Shaq that he got in those playoffs, that was an incredible carry job by D. Wade. But I really do think 2009 is when he was at his best. I think it's one of the very best non-MVP seasons ever, and this is why, again, it's not accolades that matter to me because, 2009 Dwyane Wade is so clearly an MVP-level player. He's just going up against LeBron, who had one of the, 5 greatest regular seasons in NBA history, if not the greatest regular season in NBA history. But D-Wade that year gave you 30 points, 5 boards, 7.5 assists on plus 3% relative true shooting with a plus 14 on off swing. Like, the extent to which he improved those Heat teams before LeBron is insane. In the pre-LeBron years, the Heat won 56% of their games with D-Wade. They won under 39% without him. He had a plus 9 on off-swing overall from 2004 to 2010, specifically a plus 10 offensive on off-swing while being one of the better star guard defenders we've ever seen, and maybe the GOAT shot blocking guard. So like real strong positive defensive impact with this insane offensive load on his plate. And he wasn't leading to elite offenses, but the talent around him just wouldn't allow for that. I mean, they were so catastrophically bad offensively when he was off the court. And that really is the story of the pre-LeBron years for Dwyane Wade. Like, he is doing incredible carry jobs. And from 2005 to 2011, is a 27, 5, and 7 guy in the regular season on good efficiency, plus 3% relative to shooting, even a little bit better in the playoffs, 27, 6, and 6 on plus 4% relative true shooting. And so he was carrying those teams. I mean, again, we talk about the 06 title run, but from 07 to 2010, the Heat were a negative 9.3 relative offense when he's off the court. We're talking like Woat level offense. Yes. Woat level offense. They played like one of the worst offenses ever when he's off the court.
That might be like the worst number I've ever heard.
Literally. Yeah. And when he's on the court, they were a plus 2 relative offense. He somehow took that pile of shit and he made it pretty good when he was out there.
What is it, like a 94 offensive rating or some shit
I
like
think it
that,
was.
man?
I think it was like a 94 offensive rating. So just insanity in terms of what he was asked to do. And then you pair him with LeBron, and in 2011, he's still easily a top 5 player. In 2012, he's still an all-NBA level guy. He adjusts his game nicely, and he and LeBron both figure out how to complement each other and get off the ball some more. And D-Wade becomes a really good cutting guard, like really good in terms of carving out his value off ball. They're always really good in transition. And so he's a really great complement to LeBron. And then unfortunately, just because of the degradation of his body, that was kind of weird phrasing, but you know what I mean. I mean, injuries killing him. 2013 to 2016, he's still a pretty good player, but he's not all NBA level anymore, like definitely not. So those years don't matter as much to me. That's where I think he ends up with subpar longevity, but good enough when I consider the really great peak to get him into my top 25. And I compare him to Nash. I compare him to Barry, these guys who have similar longevity overall. And out of the bunch, I would take Dwyane Wade for being such a plus defensively while also being truly an elite offensive engine who had offensive flexibility as my starting point.
Yeah, I've got D-Wade here in my 25 spot. I debated for a while before this episode on who I should have higher, D-Wade or Nash. I ultimately sided with Steve just because of the all-time offense that we got from Nash, but it was a real debate for me. I mean, I think D-Wade has such an incredible skill set, the unbelievable downhill athlete and rim pressure that he was, the free throw generator, the mid-range scoring, and the real big difference that I was debating with Nash and Wade in this was the beginning of Wade's career, because it is just so fascinating how great he was out of the gate and how immortalized he was so early on into his career. The 06 playoffs, he gives you 28, 6, and 6 with nearly 11 free throw attempts per game, with 3.3 stocks per game on over 50% from the field. In the 06 finals, gives you 35, 8, and 4 with 16 free throw attempts per game. My God, if Shai Gilgeous-Alexander had that, I mean, what would social media be talking about?
It's sad, bro, because they would have hated D-Wade because he was a foul baiter. GOAT foul drawer, also got to the rim a fuck ton, but like he was crafty about it, because it turns out a lot of great players are. Interesting.
Yeah, and that 06 finals is just unbelievable to me when you look back on it. The fact that they go down 0-2, they rattle off 4 straight. D-Wade gives you 39 points per game over the final 4 games. It is an all-time finals performance. Game 3, the Heat wipe away a 13-point fourth-quarter deficit. D-Wade gives you 15 in the fourth. Game 4, they kind of roll against Dallas. Game 5, he gets fouled off of an inbounds pass down in overtime, drains 2 free throws for the game. And then in Game 6, the Heat once again wipe away an early 14-point deficit, and D. Wade gives you 17 in the fourth quarter to get them over the finish line. As you mentioned, I think it's the fact that not only you see D. Wade as the best player get the job done, but the fact that with LeBron is the co-star on a few really good teams. The only knock I really have on D. Wade is just his longevity, keeping him from being higher. As you mentioned, the injuries sort of stack up by 2013, 2014. The knee injury is just the really debilitating thing that keeps him from sustaining his level late in his career. After and arguably during the 2013 and 2014 seasons, Wade just wasn't the same player. Like, the knee is just shot for the rest of his career. And so for Wade versus Nash, again, it was a balancing act. I think you laid it out really well. Like, Wade is great out of the gate. Nash isn't. Nash's longevity, I think, is just slightly better, and I think his offensive heights as an engine are just higher. But again, I can see an argument for Wade with the team build, with the defense, with the malleability as your number one or number two. I see that argument. I think I just prefer Nash's offensive heights, but I definitely understand, and I debated having D-Wade higher. So, D-Wade was tough to rank for those reasons, but I ultimately decided he's got to be in my top 25. I end up putting him right in my 25 spot.
I think you really could go either way with Nash or Wade. I think the peaks are close. I think Nash's longevity is slightly better. That one's really close to me, but I do just want to give Wade credit for something I talk about a lot with, like, Shai, right? The uniqueness of when you can be a plus defender and then also this level of offensive engine where you're talking about a plus 10 offensive on-off swing over all the pre-LeBron years. Like, I just think it's a shame that we didn't get more of D-Wade, obviously, that he wasn't just healthy and the same player for longer, but also the teams that he had around him from 2007 to 2010 are just like so bad, so bad. And you look at what happened in 2008 with him off the court, and it's like, cool, that's like one of the worst teams in NBA history. And so that is unfortunate. Again, even 2006, that was really a D-Wade carry job. And so I do value that peak really highly. He wasn't the best player in the league, but like, because LeBron was around. I don't know. I think like peak for peak, Kobe versus Wade is a real conversation. But again, the difference is the longevity. That's what keeps Wade down in the 25 spot.
We always mention it with that finals. The second leading scorer in that finals was Antoine Walker. It was not Shaquille O'Neal, man.
And that's washed Antoine Walker. Not to say that I was ever too high on Mr. Jacking Up Threes, but yeah, it's crazy. It really is that team that he got to win a title over a really, really good Mavs team. Although shout out Dirk for getting that Mavs team to be as good as they were. That's also not a team that was stacked. I mean, Josh Howard was their second leading scorer. So shout out Dirk, shout out Dwyane Wade. In my 24 spot, because you have Nash there, I have another Suns legend. This is where I have Charles Barkley. Really, really awesome offensive player. Are we literally in lockstep?
Here
is
we
he
go,
23
man.
For you? All right, this is just
Lockstep.
objective now. There we go. We have officially honed in on the objectively correct list. Such a great offensive player, just a very efficient scoring machine. I mean, over his career, 22, 12, and 4 on plus 8% relative true shooting. When you talk about the efficiency goats, it's Nash and it's Reggie Miller and Steph Curry and Magic Johnson. Charles Barkley might take the cake just in terms of like pure true shooting percentage because he led the league for 4 straight seasons as a volume scorer. That's kind of unfathomable. He was such a unique scorer. He's one of these guys we talk about, and it's like, man, the game used to be so different. It's so interesting that a player with his skill set existed. That's why I never understand when like anybody compares anybody to Charles Barkley, because I'm like, that guy doesn't play anything like Charles Barkley. Nobody plays anything like Charles Barkley. And he had this crazy combination of overwhelming strength with legitimate skill as a ball handler, with impressive agility. And so he was a great post scorer. He was elite in transition. The grab and go ability with him was lethal. He was a great foul drawer. He was a good off-ball scorer, and he was such a good finisher. Such a good finisher in both the half court and in transition. So even though at times he could be maybe a little bit of a ball-stopping post-up hub, there were a lot of ways to use Charles offensively in which he was really really effective. And he was also a passable jump shooter, so he had at least a little bit of a counter there. Took too many threes. I think that's the criticism of him, and it didn't keep him still from being one of the most efficient scorers in NBA history. Also, the GOAT inch-for-inch rebounder, probably him or Dennis Rodman, take your pick, and a really good passer. At times, could get a little bit too much in that score-first mode, where he wasn't getting his teammates involved quite at the level you would like, but the passing skill set was absolutely there and was impressive. Also a great playoff performer. I mean, his prime playoff decade, 86 to 96, gave you 26, 13.5, and 4.5 on plus 5% relative true shooting. You pair that with a really good regular season resume in terms of impact. Like from 87 to 92 with Philly, that's after Moses and Dr. J and everything, when it's kind of just Chuck carrying teams. Hersey Hawkins is his best teammate for some of those years. Another guy who just unfortunately kind of got let down by the team around him at his best, but they won 54% of the games with him, just 43% without. So that's not like an insane on-off indicator, but definitely noteworthy. Led a couple top 3 offenses, and then he goes to Phoenix, where I do think, that was an underratedly good situation he got dropped into. Kevin Johnson was just flat out one of the best offensive players in basketball already. They were a top 5 offense, but he comes in and he makes them back-to-back number 1 offenses, and in 93 they are a historic offense. So I really like Barkley. I think in terms of the playoff scoring, the efficiency, the offensive impact, really, really great. I would say, well, I guess I kind of compare him to the guy in my 23 spot, who I know you don't have up here, but the difference in longevity matters. The lack of defensive impact with Chuck does matter, and that holds him back a little bit. But when I compare him to Wade, Nash, very comparable peaks, I think the longevity is the advantage for Chuck and why he gets the edge.
Chuck is just one of my favorite players to go back and watch tape of, just because he's such an interesting player.
Yeah.
Like, he is really, really unique. To be that small, 6'4", and to be that effective as a scorer, as a rebounder. 5 times in his career was he over 25 points per game in the regular season. As you mentioned, he was a 4-time straight league leader in true shooting percentage. And just the traits that made Chuck so unstoppable is what's so fascinating to me. The athleticism, the guy is strong as an ox, and really just what made him so unstoppable as a post scorer against slighter frame defenders. He could just overpower them on the low block and just get to his spots. He was so patient and so crafty down there. But against bigger post defenders, where you look at Chuck and maybe go, oh, well, they've got the size and the length, he was quicker than those guys and could just beat them with his foot speed to get to his spots. Like, that's what was so unique. He was just a mismatch, but not in the typical ways that you normally imagine, right? Where he's just not this overwhelming specimen, but through strength, through speed, he could overcome some of his limitations. As a rebounder, he averaged below 10 rebounds per game just once in his entire career. That was his first season in the league. He was an elite offensive rebounder. 3 times he led the league there. Really underrated free throw generator. Over 8 free throw attempts per game for his career. And really it is the longevity that just keeps him from being higher on my list. You know, after the Suns season where he goes to the finals, that's really where we see the decline, the injuries start to rack up for him. He was still an effective player, I think underratedly so, in those later years with Phoenix, in those years with Houston. I think he can get overly criticized, like Draymond shitting on him for his Houston years, I just think was unwarranted. Like, Chuck was still a really solid good. Yeah, he's a really solid player still in Houston, and I think a winning and impactful player then. But, you know, him not carrying that kind of longevity. And I've come around. I've said previously that I thought Chuck's peak was in 93. I think Chuck's peak is those later years with Philadelphia, where he's got that perfect blend of athleticism and craft and polish, you know, where in Phoenix he maybe rounds out his game in some other areas, right, as a jump shooter and playmaker, but the athleticism is really what made Chuck really, really special. And so I would take that later version of Philly version of Chuck, but Chuck's underrated, all-time scorer, really good rebounder. But it's the longevity and I would say two-way impact that keep Chuck from being higher, like you said.
Yeah, it's just crazy, like, 3 times in 4 years, he leads the league in offensive rebounds. 5 straight years, he leads in 2-point percentage. And you mentioned, I agree, I think he peaked in the later Philly years, but 88 to 91, 27, 12, and 4 on plus 12% relative true shooting. Like, really, really awesome offensive player. Again, there are some nitpicks with the offense of ball stopping at times, shot selection more so once you get into Phoenix, and he was a bit of a high turnover player, but he was just so efficient and so productive offensively. And so it does come down to the defense that holds him back, just being such a mediocre defender and being sort of caught between roles there where he brought below average rim protection for being a quote-unquote power forward. He obviously didn't have power forward size, but he also couldn't guard quicker wings, so it's just a little bit hard to find a role for Chuck defensively. Offensively, though, absolute monster. In my 23 spot, Logan, I have a monster in a different sense. This is where I have Karl Malone, and I think these two kind of go hand in hand for a lot of people. Well, you knew I was going to have him at some point, because as much as I hate the guy, I am just ranking him as a basketball player. I think Barkley has the higher peak. I'm not that high on Malone's peak. But to have 17 star-level seasons, not missing more than 2 games once, is just absurd. Again, when you talk about just quality bites at the apple, how many chances you are giving your team, the total impact you have and value you add to be the best guy on playoff teams for 17 straight years, to have 10 plus years as a top 5 player and the best guy on a contender. I just couldn't have him lower than this. He also peaked late at like 33, 34 years old in that 97, 98 range, but he had already been a top 5 player for a decade essentially at that point. So he's just one of the most consistent players, and especially scorers in NBA history. He was a walking 25, 10, and 4 on good efficiency for almost 2 decades. And as we talked about when we were discussing John Stockton, it really was Malone's offensive growth that spurred the Jazz's offensive leaps and their rise into being a truly elite offense, much more so than it was Stockton, because Stockton was the game manager, but it was Malone who was really the fulcrum, the game changer. In 1990, he becomes a hyper-efficient 30-point per game scorer, and that's when the Jazz post their first top 10 offense. Later, we always give credit to Jeff Hornacek, underrated, very important offensive player for the Jazz, becoming elite on that side of the ball. But it's also Malone's growth as a passer that leads to the best Jazz offenses we saw, where they were just an elite offense year after year in the late 90s. And I do think that Malone was a scoring machine. That's kind of the best way to put it. He was just a walking mismatch because he was so strong, but he was also so skilled and so nimble. He was a really good transition scorer, ran the floor really well for a big man, but was also just one of the great post-up ISO machines that we've seen. Elite foul drawer, most free throws made in NBA history, so call him a free throw merchant if you want, fine by me. He had that power game, but he also was a really skilled mid-range shot maker and a good driving big. He had the high post game, the low post game. He was a good pick and pop big. Like, he was the centerpiece of a lot of really good offenses, some just great offenses. And he needed help around him, certainly, but that's true for almost all bigs in NBA history, right? The play finishers, the isolation scorers, they need people who can take on the playmaking, ball handling load, and that's what he got with Stockton. That's what he got with Hornacek, but he was absolutely the driving force in those elite offenses, and he also did become a good passer to pair with that really elite scoring. And then defensively, he was pretty good. He wasn't much of a rim protector, like he was a true power forward, but he was a really good post defender. He was super strong. He had good hands. He was a good rebounder. So overall, you take that two-way impact, and I just think the results are undeniable. Also, the years for which we have the data, which is just 97 to 04, so the later stage of his career, he does have a plus 10.3 on off swing, which I do think indicates very strong impact that he sustained for a long, long time. So that's why I have him here. I will say the knocks, he is a real playoff dropper. He's a major playoff dropper, one of the bigger playoff dropping stars ever. His true shooting percentage dropped by 5 points in the playoffs from like pretty much elite to slightly below league average. That's crazy. I do think he could struggle to score against like really massive defenders who had a size athleticism advantage over him. Also, even though he did improve as a playmaker, he still posted basically an even assist to turnover ratio in the playoffs with the Jazz. So I think his decision making at times could be fallible, but it's really that scoring not translating at the same level. And again, this is where I think him not being an elite play finishing big, him being reliant on the ISO face-up game, like at the end of the day, he wasn't able to make some of those tough shots at the clip that he needed to be like a really elite playoff offensive player. So even though I think his peak isn't as high as Wade or Nash or Barry or even Barkley, he just did it for way longer. And so it's tough to deny that, to keep him out of my top 25, even with his playoff faults. I do think we talk about players who are unlucky to not have a ring, and Steve Nash is at the top of the list, right? Playing in the toughest conference in NBA history. And Charles Barkley is at the top of the list, playing in the 90s and not having the team around him until 93. I do think Karl Malone is also definitely one of the unluckiest players not to have a ring, but fuck him. I'm happy he doesn't have one. I'm just saying objectively, I do think that's the reality. He was clearly a great enough player to be the number one on a championship team, and he was a star for an extremely long time.
Yeah, some may call it luck. Some may say karmic retribution.
I hope it's karmic retribution. I don't know that sports deal out a ton of that, but I like that idea, Logan.
Yeah, I mean, it's really the peak. I understand you having him here. I mean, the longevity is absolutely ridiculous for Malone. Yeah. It's kind of incredible looking back. I mean, even when he goes to, like, the Lakers and being an effective player for them is pretty ridiculous, like, at that stage in his career. We're talking about, like, the greatest longevity. He's up there with just about anybody that you can point to from the
outside of LeBron. It really probably is him. I mean, like, Kareem is up there, obviously, and Dirk is up there, but it probably is Karl Malone. He was a flat out star at 39 years old. Like, that's just
the
crazy.
Sustaining of it for that long is ridiculous. For me, it does come down to the peak and the limitations of his skill set. I think we've disagreed a lot on the longevity point and how much we've valued it, and I think that's probably our biggest discrepancy. Is I just think there is a peak gap between Malone and the skill set of building and a winner around him versus the guys I have above Karl.
Yeah, and I think 35 to me is too low to argue. I mean, certainly with my criteria where you had him. To 27, though, if you want to say the range of Barry, Nash, Barkley, Wade, the difference in peak where it's like you feel so strongly those guys easily could have been the best player on championship teams. A couple of them did it. Barkley and Nash were both clearly good enough. I'd hear that, but again, I do think that Malone was also clearly good enough because he got them to the brink. He got them close a whole lot of times, and he did have that choker gene, and that does matter. But also, I think when you look at the totality of his career, the total impact, the total value, he belongs.
It was his conscience eating away at him in the game's
I
biggest
hope,
moments.
Man. I would love that. I don't know that he's very remorseful about any of this, though. And the NBA doesn't bring it up. Adam Silver gets some balls.
They just celebrate him. They go,
it's
his
say,
birthday!
Look who's here! Look who's here! It's everybody's favorite duo, Malone and Stockton. No, those guys are freaks.
That's what we mean when we're done with the 90s. We're not done with the 90s. We're done with those two, though.
That's super valid. All right. Who is in your 22 spot, Logan?
Another guy that I had a hard time ranking just about how high he was going to be on my list, and I'm very, very intrigued to see if he is going to be brought up during this episode for you or if he's in your top 20. I certainly think there's an argument there. I've called a lot of players on this list underrated. I think this guy is probably the most underrated player in NBA history due to his lack of a ring. I have Chris Paul here in my 22 spot, and I just think he has such a translatable winning skill set, and so the lack of a ring really does not bother me with Chris Paul. The guy is a brilliant player and playmaker. He is an all-time decision maker, and I think one of the smartest players in basketball history, just an incredibly high basketball IQ, a guy that enhances all of his teammates across all of the locations that he plays, an all-time turnover and mistake suppressor, and I think an underratedly efficient scorer and reliable jump shooter. You know, early on in his career, you have got this elite great downhill force and rim pressure at his athletic peak. Great at getting all the way downhill, drawing free throws, getting to the line during his absolute peak, and a really high two-way peak with those Hornets teams. And then later in his career with the Clippers, just an unstoppable kind of pull-up jump shooter and really reliable three-point shooter as well, where I do think a valid criticism of him with the Clippers is like maybe could have imposed himself even more as a scorer, but is leading out some of the best offenses in the league at that time with the Lob City Clippers. I think the fact that playoff success didn't follow there gets held unfairly as a criticism against him at that stage in his career. And I think also an underratedly really great defender. Not a transcendent, one of the best guard defenders of all time, but a really effective on-ball guy and defensive playmaker. I just say there's limitations for how much a small guard can be effective, but I think he's a really good defender as a guard. And I just really appreciate the metamorphosis of Chris Paul, the fact that success followed Chris Paul everywhere he went, and through different teams, different versions, and different iterations of Chris Paul, where the leader, the unquestioned leader of those Hornets teams, and getting them to reach, unparalleled franchise success. He goes on to the Clippers, another kind of sad sack franchise, and every single year, this absolute joke of a franchise, he is getting them to get to the playoffs every single year, and they are one of the top contenders in the league. He goes on to the Houston Rockets alongside a guy like James Harden, and they find the most success that they have as a team and get to the Western Conference Finals, where unfortunately he gets hurt and faces some bad luck. The Phoenix Suns, who hadn't been really relevant since Steve Nash exited, they get this all-time point guard into the fold, and that's a really good team around him too. But I think there's an argument that Chris Paul was the best player on those teams and gets them to the finals. Just pretty incredible and underappreciated longevity for me. That's what bumped him up a few spots for me. I debated Chris Paul somewhere in this range at my 25, at my 26, and I just came back to success followed this guy everywhere. He's got incredible longevity, incredible two-way impact. I had to bump him up a few spots. I think Chris Paul's a winner. I think he's got such a winning skill set, and the longevity just puts him over the top. The fact that this guy did it in so many different spots for so long. The Nash one specifically, if I had to highlight a guy that I was debating, the peak of Steve Nash and what he was able to do is one of the greatest offensive engines of all time, I just do really appreciate the longevity and the two-way impact that comes with Chris Paul across so many different situations, man. I know how much you love Chris Paul. I assume that you'll have him maybe a little bit higher. Chris Paul's got to be in the top 25, man. I think he's the most underrated player ever.
I have him at 21, and it's the absolute lowest I could go. And, I really considered him all the way up to, 17. It's tough because I do think once you get into the top 20, you are talking about, the all-time giants. You are talking about the greatest peaks in NBA history. And that's where I think CP3 doesn't stack up to the best of the best. I think his peak was extremely high, but the guys who are falling into that 17 to 20 range, I would say all peaked higher than Chris Paul. The question is, how does his longevity offset that? Because the longevity is insane, and the total resume of impact with the still elite peak that he had, I want him in my top 20. I guess he just couldn't quite crack the peak threshold that he would need to. But, if you wanted to argue Chris Paul is a top 15 player in NBA history, I'd hear the argument. That's how high I am on him, because it's just absurd how positively he impacted the game in so many ways for so long. I do think he's the most complete point guard in NBA history. He was a high-level scorer, especially in the playoffs. Chris Paul is an elite playoff scoring point guard, and he sustained that scoring value for a long time, largely predicated on just some of the greatest mid-range shot making ever. This was a guy who could manufacture crazy mid-range volume and make about 50% of those shots. Just masterful in how he controlled the game, how comfortably he could navigate to his spots and reliably make those shots. And he was such a good shot maker that, as you're saying, he was still an efficient scorer even as a small guard after his athletic peak when he wasn't the level of slasher and rim pressure that he was with the Hornets. He's still putting on scoring clinics in the playoffs in Phoenix at 37 years old. Like, at every stage, he was such an effective playoff scorer. He's obviously one of the greatest passers in NBA history. And even though he's not a Nash-level passer, there is a different level of audacity, creativity that Nash is bringing to the table that adds some value. Nash just hit a lot more like home run assists than Chris Paul. Chris Paul was going to make so many good passes over the course of a game. And he is one of the greats we've seen still, not Nash level, but at amplifying his bigs off the roll, at getting everybody good offense around him, and, as you're saying, protecting the basketball. I think that's the trade-off with Chris Paul. A guy like Nash, I do just think is a better offensive player, but specifically opened up a higher offensive ceiling with his ability to take chances that were mostly going to pay off. Chris Paul was a little bit more prone to slowing the game down, was a little bit more conservative offensively, but the trade-off for that is the guy just didn't make mistakes. He never turned the ball over, and having a player who can stabilize an offense like that, who can be an efficient volume scorer, who's a great playmaker, who you put the ball in his hands, and he's never going to give it away, like that level of control over the game is what I always come back to with Chris Paul. He controlled the game as well as anybody we've seen. He's one of the greatest pick and roll players ever. And on top of all that elite stuff he did offensively, where he led elite team offenses year after year across different situations, he is bringing you clear plus defense, elite hands, exceptional defensive IQ, one of the smartest players in NBA history, elite speed at his best, like one of the best small guards defensively in NBA history. As you're saying, there's only so much impact you can have as a small guard. I think his, 9 all-defense selections probably overstate his defensive impact, but he was a clear plus defensively for a long time. He did have a very high defensive peak, and the longevity I just keep coming back to because it's so absurd. It's some of the best longevity ever for any player, but especially for a small guard. To be, in my opinion, the best player on a finals team at 36, to be arguably the best player on a 64-win team at 37, and go into a playoff series and average 22, 4, and 11 on 66% true shooting, to have all NBA seasons 15 years apart. And keep in mind, this is one of the guys who came into the league and was immediately awesome. One of the better rookie guards this century. And one of the best 37-year-old guards ever. All of that, man. What a career for Chris Paul.
And I didn't agree with the rationale at the time, but just to give context to what people around the league thought of Chris Paul, even with that Suns team, he was still getting MVP votes, man.
Right. Yeah. Which, again, I didn't agree with, but it's insane. It's insane that he still was in those conversations. And overall, I just think his impact on team performance speaks for itself. The notion that people would try to say that Chris Paul is not a winner when he is so clearly one of the greatest winners in NBA history, who has a proven resume as a winner in so many different situations that nobody else can match. Just in terms of, I go here, I make them way better. They get way worse when I leave. I go here, I make them way better. And the same pattern continues. I do just want to break it down stop by stop. You guys will have to excuse me. I'm going to talk about Chris Paul for a long time, but I just think he is so underrated. He is so underappreciated. He is so misunderstood, and he's so great. So the Hornets years, he joins them as a rookie, improves them by 20 wins. After he leaves, they go from being a playoff team, a perennial playoff team, to immediately picking first overall. They won 56% of their games with him, 43% without him. He had a +9 on-off differential in the Hornets years. He goes to the Clippers. They won 68.5% of their games with him, 48.5% without. So they were elite when he was on the court. They were mediocre when he was off it. He had a +14.5 on-off swing and a +12 offensive on-off swing, which means they were historic offenses with him on, and they were well below average offenses with him off. He joined the Clippers. They improved by an 18-win pace. After he left the team, they fell off by 9 wins. Then he goes to Houston, and he joins a team that is already good. He makes them great. He makes them one of the best offenses ever, improves them by 10 wins. After he leaves the team, even though they traded him for another star guard in Russell Westbrook, they fall off by 9 wins. They're a substantially worse basketball team. When he played in Houston, they won 77% of their games. Like, they were so dominant. I mean, people come back to in 2018. What's the stat when Chris Paul, and Capella all played? They were 42-3. I mean, something ridiculous like that. And that was not an intuitive fit. But he made it work at this historic offensive level. And when he didn't play, they were good, not great. He had a plus 6.5 point on-off swing in the Houston years. And interestingly, in terms of net rating, they were actually at their best in the CP3 solo minutes. I don't think that means a ton. They were really good when he and Harden played together. They were really good when Harden played alone. But I do just want to make sure he gets his credit in terms of how vitally important he was to how elite those teams were in 2018 and 2019. Then he goes to the Thunder, and this is supposed to be a transitional year because they lost Russell Westbrook, trading for CP3. They lost Paul George to the Clippers, and they go 44-26 with Chris Paul, 0-2 without him. He has a plus 11 on off swing, and they almost beat the Rockets in a playoff series that year, and they slightly improved their record from the year prior, in a year that, again, they were supposed to be resetting. Then after this, he does leave. He goes to Phoenix, and immediately OKC does tank, have their win total, and actually start one of the more egregious, like, multi-year tanking stretches that we've seen. But when Chris Paul was there, he made them a really good team and got them in the playoffs and almost got them to win a playoff series against a much more talented team on paper. And then he goes to the Suns, and they win 70% of the games that he plays, and they improve by a 20-win pace immediately when he joins the team, and he takes them from years of despair and one bubble play-in appearance to the NBA Finals. And once he's no longer the same, that's when it's over for Phoenix. Like, he was such an essential part of their success. So, as you said, it is the metamorphosis. It's the adjustment in every phase where we saw him dominate as the extremely explosive downhill athlete, one of the quickest players ever in New Orleans. We saw him dominate as the more methodical elite shot maker who also spoon-fed his elite play finishers in Blake and DeAndre Jordan in the Clippers years. We saw him in Houston become a volume isolation scorer and thrive alongside another ball-dominant player and enhance those offenses to places they'd never been before. We saw him carry that OKC team for a year. Then we saw him go to Phoenix, and again, now we're talking mid-late 30s, scale down his scoring volume, lead those offenses with brilliant playmaking, controlling the game at a masterful level, and then in the playoffs, he could scale up his scoring as needed and still barbecue you. He led 3 number 1 offenses in his career, led 10 top 5 offenses, and the playoff resume with Chris Paul is so underrated because in his career in the playoffs, he averaged 20 points and over 8 assists a game on better than 58% true shooting. He is the only player in NBA history to hit those marks in the playoffs. He is in the very rare group of great players whose scoring volume and efficiency both went up in the playoffs. And also, people will try to hold clutch performance against him, right? I mean, that's the biggest knock on Chris Paul. People say, oh, he's a playoff shrinker. Well, no, he's not. He arguably got better in the playoffs. But then they'll say, oh, but in the big moments, he sucked. He has the best effective field goal percentage ever on game-tying and go-ahead field goals in the clutch in the playoffs with a minimum of 15 field goals made. In terms of raw field goal percentage in the fourth quarter and overtime in the playoffs with a certain volume minimum, he is second only to Shaquille O'Neal. And we're talking about a small guard who was living off jumpers, and he was still that damn good. His numbers are great in elimination games, great in game 7s. Like, he is the unluckiest player in NBA history. If you take individual injuries out of it, right? If we don't count Bill Walton or Joel Embiid, it is just unfathomable with all of the years of elite impact he had that between injuries to himself and others, between teammate letdowns, he didn't come away with a championship. And I will defend the guy forever because I just think, again, the picture that is painted of his career is so inaccurate. And people will like point to the series versus OKC, right? People say, oh, Chris Paul is a playoff shrinker. And then they kind of always talk about like a couple plays that he had in one series once that were a really bad couple plays, but they ignore the fact that he was awesome in that series, that he was giving you 23 points and 12 assists a game on 61% true shooting and facing a more talented Thunder team while Jamal Crawford and Matt Barnes couldn't hit a shot for the Clippers and their bench gave them nothing. And by the way, if you look back at the Clippers in the playoff series they lost, oftentimes it is, oh my God, the role players were abysmal. 2015, that's the other one people point to, and they're like, oh my God, what a meltdown. Bro, go look at the numbers. I mean, literally, games 5 through 7, Crawford and Redick and Barnes, these guys are shooting like 25% from the field, and they're getting solid looks created for them, and they are just bricking. So I think that is representative of the story of Chris Paul's career, that people often distort reality to put blame on him and take away credit for the fact that he is ultimately a great playoff performer who played at a high level for 18 years and made so many teams so much better. One of the great offensive engines we've seen, who was also a clear plus defensively, and overall, over his career, posted a +9 on-off differential with a minimum of 500 games. That puts him only behind Kevin Garnett, LeBron James, Steph Curry, Nikola Jokic, and Dirk Nowitzki. Like, when you are talking about that sample of on-off differential, in that many different situations, it's just undeniable how impactful the guy was on winning. He also has the 5th best plus-minus in recorded NBA history, trailing only Duncan, LeBron, Dirk, and Steph. He's just in such rare company when it comes to impacting winning, which is what matters. So with my criteria, like, this is as low as I could possibly have him, and I don't know, I'll probably lose some sleep over it, but at least I did nothing but glaze him in my spiel, so I can feel good about that.
Yeah, somebody chop that up and give Chris Paul an insane aura edit. Yeah,
I did make a whole video. If anybody wants even more, a couple years ago I did an entire Chris Paul legacy appreciation video pretty much, because there's just so many myths that aren't true about him.
Yeah, I just don't know how all that we've listed off, I don't know how you listen to that and come away with Chris Paul as a loser and overrated. And the final thing that I just wanted to add is, I talk about the metamorphosis of Chris Paul, him transforming, but it's so impressive to me the different archetypes and kind of players that he had to adjust his play style for, and how he ultimately enhanced them all. Like, you just can't take that for granted. We do this exercise, where a star player changes teams and you just kind of fill in the blanks. And this isn't a one-to-one comparison, so I don't want to make it out to be. But, like, think about Damian Lillard and Giannis Antetokounmpo, and we thought that was going to be like a perfect fit and a match made in heaven. And, like, obviously there are some other factors that made that not a perfect fit. But, like, every step of the way, Chris Paul, if you're putting him with Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan, boom, elite offense, and he is making the most out of both of those guys and getting them to their absolute heights. With James Harden, who is a completely different type of player, alongside him, figured out how to play with him and how to maximize Harden. Devin Booker, alongside him, maxing him out in that team. Like, it is so impressive to me that every step of the way, Chris Paul transformed, changed his game, and got the absolute most out of every team he played for. That, to me, is undeniable. And the fact that he doesn't have a championship ring, that's just one fact. It's just one fact that in a career of unimaginable success in every situation, I just can't hold that one thing against him. It doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of his career to me that he doesn't come away with a championship ring. It's not his fault.
He's the greatest player ever not to win a championship, and you can say, oh, there is a level of dominance at which, like, you're just going to get one. And I don't think Chris Paul is quite at that level. Again, I don't think he has one of the absolute highest peaks in NBA history, but he was a top 5 player for so long. He was a top 10 player for longer than that. And there are, like, criticisms to be made of him, right? He's not perfect, obviously. And I think you can talk about the fact that he's not a top-tier offensive engine as a guard. I mean, he led a lot of great offenses, but he's not Nash, he's not Curry, he's not Magic, he's not Oscar Robertson, right? Like, that is a reality. He did dominate the ball, and maybe you wish he was more aggressive as a passer, and I get all of that. But to still be one of the 20-ish greatest offensive players ever, and to also be a clear plus defender, and to do it this long in this many situations, I think I've said it all at this point, but I really am so high on Chris Paul and just the total impact that he delivered over the course of his career. Another guy I'm really high on is David Robinson. So we do come back. We started with some David Robinson discourse. We end with some David Robinson discourse. I have him at number 22. He's another guy who I could see winding up with a little bit higher. His peak is higher than Chris Paul's, but the longevity is obviously the advantage for CP3. As I've said, this guy is just one of the greatest two-way floor raisers in NBA history, one of the greatest regular season peaks in NBA history. He joined a 21-win team with a -7 net rating, and as a rookie, was already a top 5 player, improved them to 56 wins, improved their offensive rating by 6.5 points, improved their defensive rating by 4 points, just transformed them on both sides of the ball. I mentioned already a lot of these numbers, to be honest with you, but the theme that I would like to continue to hammer home is whenever David Robinson was off the court, before Duncan joined the team, the Spurs sucked. And whenever he was on the court, they were awesome. Like, if you look at 1997, again, that is coming off of a season in which they won 59 games with Robinson. When you take him off the court, now they are a -9 net rating team with the worst defense in the NBA when they were a top 3 defense the year prior with Robinson. And they're a bottom 3 where they were a top 10 offense the year prior with Robinson. And then 1998, he comes back. Duncan joins the team. They win 56 games. They come back from being the worst defense in the NBA to the number 2 defense in the NBA. Like, that level of defensive impact is just absurd. He's a top 5 defensive player ever. He anchored 4 top 3 defenses and 2 number 1 defenses before Duncan ever joined the team. And then also 93 to 96, he is by far the best offensive player on 4 straight top 8 offenses and is a truly elite scorer, crazy volume and efficiency. And so again, just the fact that before Duncan, his teams averaged a better than 55 win pace when he was on the court. And when he was off the court, they're posting a -7 net rating overall over those years. Like, it's just absurd. The talent that Robinson was able to make into elite basketball teams. And again, the one really good teammate he had was Sean Elliott. And the one year that Elliott left for Detroit, guess what? The Spurs still won 55 games. Like, just the extent to which he carried his team on both sides of the ball, absolutely ridiculous at his peak. And then you have the second stage, 98 to 01, when he's still playing at an all-NBA level, as still, at that point, the best defender on the best defenses in the NBA, and he was a good offensive player, not what he was at his best, of course, but like, the impact is still crazy. From 98 to 01, between the regular season and the playoffs, he still had a +9 on-off swing, and they were a +10.5 net team when he played. And then, even from 01 to 03, which is when Databaller first starts tracking like on-off data on each specific side of the ball, their defensive rating was 6 points better with Robinson on the court. They had a -7.5 relative defensive rating. That's a historically great defense. And they were 5 points better when he and Duncan shared the floor than when Duncan played alone. So even when we think about old David Robinson, he was still so impactful defensively. And again, I just wish we had the numbers in terms of the more advanced stuff, the on-off stuff for his entire career, because the indicators post-prime are still so impressive. And again, like, we know what happened throughout his peak. They were amazing with him. They fell apart without him. I just wish we had like all of the numbers that we have today. But at his best for 7 seasons, he was a number 1 scorer, top tier defender ever, who made thoroughly mediocre teams elite year after year, gave you 7 MVP level seasons, and then he still gave you 4 more All-NBA caliber seasons as the second best player on elite teams. I am so high on Robinson, and I just think even though he was a playoff dropper, he was held back by his passing limitations, his lack of really elite physicality as a scorer, being a little bit over-reliant on the finesse game. He was not as effective offensively in the playoffs at his peak as he was in the regular season. But still, again, that drop is 24, 12, and 3 on +2% relative true shooting with all-time great defense. And so it's just hard for me not to think about Robinson being paired with a great playmaking guard, being paired with just a good team offense. Because, again, we saw him as one of the GOAT floor raisers, but he would have been every bit as great, if not greater, as a ceiling raiser, and very much is Kevin Garnett-like in the way that he was just given such a massive task offensively that, no, he wasn't meant to carry, to be the number 1 offensive player on a championship team, probably, but he was such a good offensive player, one of the most dominant defenders we've ever seen, and so easily could have been the best overall player on championship teams. So, yeah, I think we've talked about David Robinson a lot, but this is the range that I have to have him in. I think his peak is so high. And again, in the regular season, you can put his best up against like just about anybody. Not that level of playoff player, but you can't really overstate the value of what he did for those teams in the regular season.
Yeah, like I said at the top of the show, I would definitely at least bump him here into my top 30. I think that was a mistake of mine. And I think just in general, I think I'm going to have to go back and dive more into David Robinson and those supporting casts. Like, I do think that generally, as I'm looking back at my list in totality, I think I have had more of an offensive bias. I think I've kind of generally underrated defensive guys on this list. And, yeah, I just need to dive more into those supporting casts. I think I kind of unfairly held some of the longevity concerns against Robinson, even though he was impactful into those later stages in his career. And I think I've also kind of underrated those early teams that he was dragging to the kind of success that he was. So I'm going to need to revisit David Robinson. But I will put my hand up and admit I definitely should have at least had him in my top 30. I think that was a mistake.
Logan, I appreciate that very much. Yeah, I mean, the supporting cast, it really is crazy how good they were and how singularly Robinson was responsible. Sean Elliott was good. You get a year and a half of Dennis Rodman. You get like one good year of Terry Cummings in 1990, and then it's just like Admiral, carry us on both sides of the ball for 7 years. And he did it. He did it so damn well. Unlucky for sure that he didn't have more help in those years when he was at his absolute best. But even though the longevity isn't great, it's still good enough for me to absolutely have Robinson close to the top 20. I do think once you get into the top 20, I mean, you're talking about really, really special players, but Chris Paul, David Robinson are a couple of guys who I'm extremely high on and love as well. Honestly, I mean, outside of Karl Malone, we talked about a lot of guys in the latter half of this episode who I really like. So shout out to all of them, especially shout out to Chris Paul, even though probably wouldn't like hanging out with him. Maybe I wouldn't go to his Halloween party. As a basketball player, amazing. I'm just saying I think he kind of, gets on people's nerves, but I don't care. He's goated.
We would go to Chris Paul's Halloween party.
We definitely would, actually, now that I think about it. We'd be like, holy shit. Why the fuck is Chris Paul inviting us?
Exactly. And
We'd be like, I've never even met the guy.
We would probably dress up as like two different parts of a giraffe or something. It would be electric.
That's a good idea. I was thinking maybe like a Where's Waldo situation.
Or we could be like a 12-foot tall guy in a trench coat, maybe.
Okay, I like that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Some sort of two-manner is what we're going with
Exactly.
here. I like the giraffe. Who's the ass?
Oh, I'm definitely the ass. Yeah, for sure. Well,
I
do have the neck. I do have the neck,
Well, it's a costume. I don't know if it matters, but I mean, I was thinking, yeah, you've got a great rump. Yeah, you can be the ass. Sure, why not, man?
Okay, perfect.
All right. Well, on that note, we continue our journey next week. We will see you guys all then. I guess let's just recap numbers 30 through 21, Logan. Just read out everybody you had in this range.
Affirmative, Mr. Breber.
Thanks, buddy.
In my number 30 spot, I have Anthony Davis, although that has now been retconned and redacted to be David Robinson, but for this exercise. Valid. I have AD. 29, I have Luka Doncic. 28, I have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. 27, I have Kawhi Leonard. 26, Rick Barry. 25, Dwyane Wade. 24, Steve Nash. 23, Charles Barkley. 22, Chris Paul. And 21, Moses Malone.
At number 30, I have John Havlicek. 29, Scottie Pippen. 28, Moses Malone. 27, Rick Barry. 26, Steve Nash. 25, Dwyane Wade. 24, Charles Barkley. 23, Karl Malone. 22, David Robinson. And 21, Chris Paul. I hope you guys are enjoying how thorough this series has been. I know these episodes are really long, but I don't know, man. I just want to get all my thoughts out there about all these guys. For me, it's fun. I hope you guys like it because there's just a lot to discuss. I mean, these are a lot of great careers, and I kind of want to cover every base, but I'm probably going to go collapse now after, I don't know. How long did I talk about Chris Paul and David Robinson? 4 or 5 hours? Yeah.
A day, about.
Yeah. I blacked out.
They needed it. They deserved it. Every bit
I
of
hope,
it.
man. I hope they appreciate it. Hope you guys appreciate it. We sure appreciate you. You know where to find all of our stuff. Trivia episodes, NBA news reaction, continuing this series. It's all on our YouTube channel and across all audio platforms. And you can also follow us across social for our daily content there. Of course, Instagram and TikTok at NerdSesh, Twitter at nerd_sesh. And with that, we will see you all very soon. I've been Carson Brabber.
I've been Logan Camden.
And this was Nerd Sesh.